There is a moment in Book 2 of Avatar, The Last Airbender, where the gang stumbles into an enormous library buried in the desert, and the spirit who built it, a great horned owl made of paper and shadow, lets them stay only as long as they keep feeding his collection. The whole story of Avatar is built on libraries like that. Knowledge that almost reached us, truths the show only half answered, dropped in passing, or left for someone else to finish. Tonight we are going through every real mystery the series left open, and every theory the fans have spent the better part of 2 decades building to fill in the spaces. So get comfortable, settle in, the lights low if you have them, a blanket up to your chin, and if you have not subscribed to Ember yet, it genuinely does help us keep these going. The first thing to understand about Avatar is that the show is unusually generous with implication and unusually stingy with confirmation. Most animated children's shows of its era closed every loop they opened. Avatar opens loops on purpose and then walks past them, trusting that some of you will be the kind of viewer who notices the loop is still open 3 episodes later. The result is a story with a strange aftertaste. You finish it and you feel like you understand the world, and then a week passes and you start listing the things you do not actually know. You do not know what most of the world looked like during the 100 years Aang was frozen. You do not know what happened to most of the air nomads beyond the temples we see. You do not know who Koh the Face Stealer actually is, or how old he is, or how he chooses. You do not know what was in the deepest aisles of Wan Shitong's library. You do not know what the lion turtles did when they were not giving bending away or saving a young avatar in a finale. You do not know, for most of the series, where Zuko's mother went. And even when the comics tell you, you do not really know what the price of her decision was. Tonight is a long walk through all of that, slow and unhurried, in the order the show would walk through it. We start with the silence. The 100 years Aang spent in the iceberg are the great gap at the center of the series. Aang is 12 when he is frozen, and 12 when he wakes, and the world he wakes into is a world that has spent 100 years grieving him, and 100 years being conquered without him. The show tells you this in pieces. You hear it through Sokka and Katara's grandmother. You hear it through the empty southern air temple. You hear it through Bumi, who is a child Aang knew and is now a man past 100 years old. But the show very rarely sits inside the 100 years themselves. There are no flashback episodes that show you the burning of the temples in real time. There is no sequence that follows the Fire Nation army from Sozin's first march to Azulon's reign. The 100 years exist as a kind of long inhale that the show never quite exhales. You sense them in everything. The destroyed villages, the way Katara talks about her mother, the fact that Hama, the old waterbender Aang's group, meets in Book 3, was a young woman when the Fire Nation took the Southern Water Tribe's benders, and is now an old woman with a century of unanswered rage, living in a quiet house in a Fire Nation town. The show gives you Hama not to explain the 100 years, but to let you feel them. She is what living through them does to a person. She is also, in her way, one of the show's first answers to a question that nobody had quite asked aloud yet, which is what waterbending does when waterbending is not allowed to be anything else. The mystery underneath all of that is what the world actually was, politically, during the long stretch between Aang and Aang. The broad shape, as the wider canon has it, is fairly settled. Fire Lords Sozin attacks the air nomads using the power of his namesake comet, eradicates them as a people, and then dies as an old man. His son Azulon takes the throne and continues the war for decades. Azulon dies under suspicious circumstances after a visit from his daughter-in-law Ursa, and his son Ozai takes the throne and continues the war until Sozin's comet returns. That is 4 generations of Fire Lords and roughly a century of continuous war, and the show only ever gives you the highlights. We are not shown the fall of Omashu in real time. We are not shown the original siege of Ba Sing Se, where Iroh's son Lu Ten died. We are not shown the burning of the Southern Water Tribe's bending lineage down to the single thread that becomes Katara. All of that is reported, gestured at, half-remembered. The choice to keep it off-screen is one of the reasons the world feels so old. You always have the sense that you have arrived at the very end of something, and that someone could write you another 6 seasons just on what came before. The air nomad genocide itself is the first true mystery of the series, and one of the show's most carefully handled. It is also one of its quietest. The Fire Nation, under Sozin, uses the strength they draw from his comet to attack all 4 air temples simultaneously, killing every airbender they can find. We see the aftermath in the Southern Air Temple episode of Book 1, the one where Aang finds his old mentor Gyatso's skeleton, surrounded by the armor of the firebenders who came for him. That image is the only image of the genocide the show gives you directly for a long time, and it is doing a great deal of work. It is telling you that the air nomads did not go quietly. It is telling you that they fought and that they killed, even though their entire philosophy was built around not doing exactly that. It is also telling you, by what it does not show, that the rest of the temples were probably similar scenes. Children in their robes, elders who had taught airbending for 100 years, bison, lemurs, a whole culture that the world had no reason to suspect was going to be destroyed in a single night. The genocide is the show's first lesson about how Avatar treats history. Big events arrive off-screen. The grief of them arrives in detail. The question fans have asked for years is whether anyone survived. Within the original animated series, the answer the show gives Aang is essentially no. He is the last airbender, and the show takes that loneliness seriously. It is one of the things that makes him difficult, and one of the things that makes him kind. He is the last living member of a culture that was built around community and impermanence, and he has had to learn impermanence as a person rather than as a teaching. The comics, which are canon and supervised by the show's creators, do introduce a small group of airbending descendants, the air acolytes, people who follow the air nomad philosophy without bending. Legend of Korra, which is also canon and set roughly 70 years later, introduces a small population of newly emerged airbenders after a spiritual upheaval restores bending in random people across the world. But within the animated series itself, the genocide is whole. There are no hidden enclaves. There are no air nomad survivors in caves. The show wants you to feel that loss completely and only afterward to feel its slow undoing. We can pull back here and talk about Avatar Wan, because everything about how bending exists in the world begins with him, even though he is not introduced in Avatar, The Last Airbender at all. He is a creation of Legend of Korra, revealed in a pair of episodes called Beginnings in Korra's second book, and he is treated as fully canonical by the franchise. Wan lives in a time when humans live on the backs of the lion turtles, who lend humans bending temporarily so that they can venture into the wild and gather food. Wan refuses to return his firebending and ends up exiled into the wilderness. He travels, learns the other three elements, befriends the dragons, and during the same celestial event that brings Sozin's comet around every century, the convergence of the spirit world and the human world, called harmonic convergence, he fuses with the light spirit Rava to become the first Avatar. The animated series never tells you any of this. The original show treats the Avatar as a given, an inherited cycle, a duty. Wan is the answer to a question Avatar. The Last Airbender never quite asks aloud, which is why the Avatar exists at all and where the responsibility came from. He is also the show's quietest piece of theology. The Avatar is not appointed by a god. The Avatar is a partnership between a human soul and a spirit of light, locked in eternal balance against a spirit of darkness called Vatu. Inside the original animated series, none of that is on the table. Inside the wider canon, it is the foundation under the foundation. The lion turtles are the most beautiful unanswered question in the whole show. They are introduced in the 4-part finale of Book 3, when Aang, on the eve of having to fight Ozai, is washed up on an island that turns out to be the back of an enormous creature, an ancient and patient being who teaches him a fourth path, Energybending. The lion turtle speaks in slow and measured riddles. He talks about the dark times, the old ways, the original method of bending before benders learned from the animals. He gives Aang a way to defeat Ozai without killing him, and then he leaves. The show never tells you where he came from, why he chose that moment, why there is no record of him in any history we are shown, why the Order of the White Lotus does not seem to know about him, why even the spirits of the past avatars treat his arrival as a fresh idea rather than a remembered one. The Korra episode Beginnings gives you a partial answer. In Wan's time, lion turtles are everywhere. They are essentially the carriers of civilization. After Wan leaves, the show implies, the lion turtles withdraw because human cities take over the wild. They go quiet. They wait. They are not extinct, but they are deeply off-stage. The lion turtle in Aang's finale is not the only one. There are likely many, sleeping in the deep places, and one of them woke up because the world needed him to. That is the most honest thing the show ever says about its spirituality. Help arrives. It does not always explain why. Energy bending is the technique the lion turtle teaches Aang, and the technique the show very deliberately never lets anyone else use. Aang bends the energy inside Ozai's spirit to make Ozai unable to firebend ever again. It is presented as enormously dangerous. The lion turtle warns that if Aang's spirit is not strong and unbendable, his own energy will be corrupted. There is a strong implication that this is not just a stronger Avatar move. It is a much older move, perhaps the original move, from before the elements were separated into 4 neat categories. Fans have spent the better part of 2 decades arguing about it. One reading is that Energybending is the secret behind everything we have already seen. Bloodbending, in some interpretations, is a corrupted form of it. Lava bending and metal bending, both shown later in Korra, are filed by some viewers as evolutions of the same underlying technique, energy moving through a body. The show itself does not confirm any of this. What it does confirm is that the technique exists, that Aang used it once, and that no one in the franchise's surrounding decades has tried to teach it in any reliable way. Whether that is because it is dangerous, because the lion turtles withdrew their guidance, or because losing your firebending forever is too terrifying a punishment to deploy outside of a final battle, the show leaves to you. The Sun Warriors are the next great quiet revelation. In Book 3, in the episode The Firebending Masters, Zuko and Aang travel together to a ruined city, expecting to find the last of the original dragons, who, according to common Fire Nation knowledge, had been hunted to extinction generations earlier. What they find is a hidden civilization that has lived in the ruins the entire time. The Sun Warriors are the people who first learned firebending from the dragons, rather than from later Fire Nation traditions. They never adopted the rage-based, fear-powered firebending that the Fire Nation military uses. They learned firebending as a dance, as a meditation, as a way of carrying the sun inside your chest. The 2 dragons, Ran and Shaw, are still alive. They were the masters that Iroh, years earlier, had also tracked down and learned from, which is why Iroh's firebending feels so different from his brothers. Iroh told the world that he killed the last dragon to protect them. What the show leaves you wondering about is how much of the Fire Nation's spiritual history is exactly the same kind of lie. How much of what the world believes about the Fire Nation is a story the Fire Nation told to bury an older and truer one. The Sun Warriors are still there. The dragons are still there. The original firebending is still there. It just had to be hidden from itself. Avatar Yangchen is the air nomad avatar who came before Kuruk, and she is, in the original series, almost entirely a name. She appears as a spirit in Book 2, and her advice to Aang, when he asks her how to reconcile his pacifism with his duty, is the most quietly devastating exchange in the whole show. She tells him that the Avatar can never do what is easiest. The Avatar must do what is hardest, which is whatever the world needs. The implication is that she herself made decisions she did not like in order to keep balance, and that Aang will have to as well. Outside the animated series, the author F C Yee has written novels about her, supervised within the wider canon. Those books fill in a lifetime of compromise and political stewardship that the show only points at. Inside Avatar: The Last Airbender itself, Yangchen is the air nomad ghost who tells the Last Airbender that his ancestors made harder choices than he wants to believe. That is the only mystery she gets, and it is the one she leaves Aang to solve on his own. Avatar Kuruk is the Water Tribe Avatar 2 generations before Roku, and his story is the most personal in the chain. The show tells you, through Aang's spiritual journey to consult past avatars, that Kuruk was a relaxed and easygoing avatar who let the world look after itself a little too much. He was engaged to a woman named Umi, and on their wedding day, the spirit Koh, the Face Stealer, took her face as revenge for what Kuruk had failed to do to keep the spirits in balance. Kuruk spent the rest of his life hunting Koh and never recovered her. That is the version of the story Aang hears, and the version the show fully commits to. The expanded canon novels by F C Yee, The Rise of Kyoshi and The Shadow of Kyoshi, complicate Kuruk's reputation enormously. They portray him as a far more haunted figure, doing real and dangerous work in the spirit world that nobody saw. The series gives you the easy summary. The books give you the man underneath. Both are canon. The honest answer about Kuruk, as far as fans have pieced it together, is that he was a more responsible avatar than his successors realized, and that the loss of Umi was both a punishment for his approach and the catalyst that changed how avatars handled the spirit world for centuries afterward. Avatar Kyoshi is the avatar before Roku, and she is the longest-lived avatar on record. The show puts her age at 230 years, which is staggering for any human and almost mathematically incompatible with the rest of the avatar cycle. She is the one who founded the Dai Li, the elite group of earthbenders who would, by Aang's lifetime, become the secret police of Ba Sing Se under Long Feng's leadership. She is also the one who personally separated Kyoshi Island from the mainland by bending it loose, in order to keep her people safe from the warlord Qin the Conqueror. The wider canon, again through F C Yee's novels, gives you the long version of her life, her training under a Dao Fei outlaw collective, her relationships, her decisions, her violence. The animated series gives you just the silhouette, a tall woman in white face paint, a voice that sounds like centuries of practice, a willingness to do what Yang Chen described, what is hardest. What lingers around Kyoshi is whether her founding of the Dai Li was a mistake. By the time we meet them in Book 2, the Dai Li are an instrument of psychological control under Long Feng's hand. Kyoshi probably did not imagine that. Or maybe, given what the books tell you about her, she did imagine it and trusted that the next several avatars would keep the lid on it. Either way, what she built outlasted her, and it outlasted the version of itself she would have approved of. Avatar institutions tend to do that. Avatar Roku is the most directly relevant of the past avatars, and the one whose story becomes Aang's whole life. Roku grew up alongside the boy who would become Fire Lords Sozin. They were close friends. When Roku discovered Sozin's plan to expand the Fire Nation into the other 3 nations by force, he confronted his old friend and made him stop. For decades, Sozin obeyed. When Roku grew old, a volcano erupted near his home. Sozin came to help. In the middle of the eruption, Sozin made a decision, and that decision was to leave Roku to die in the lava and ash. Roku's death meant the next avatar would be born into the air nomads. Sozin had a comet coming and 100 years to plan, and he used them. That entire backstory is delivered in a single episode, The Avatar and the Fire Lord, in Book 3, and it is the show's purest version of what the Avatar's life actually is. You are friends with people. They become powerful. They make decisions. You try to stop them. Eventually, one of you is on a mountainside watching the other one breathe lava. What lingers around Roku is whether he knew he was being abandoned, or whether he died trusting the friend who had already decided not to save him. The show leans toward the second reading. That is what makes it heartbreaking. King Bumi is the only direct living link between the world Aang lost and the world Aang has to save. He was Aang's friend before the iceberg, a slightly strange and brilliant child who liked to throw rocks at things. By the time Aang meets him again in Omashu, he is 112 years old, which the show treats as old but achievable for a powerful earthbender. He spent the entire 100 years that Aang was frozen ruling Omashu under increasing strain, refusing for most of that time to engage in the war directly, and then, in the finale of Book 2, allowing his city to be taken in a way that left him perfectly placed to retake it during the eclipse on the Day of Black Sun. He is one of the founding members of the Order of the White Lotus, as far as the show indicates. What Bumi leaves you with is the quietest mystery in the series, because he himself refuses to spell it out. He waited. He waited for the right moment. He waited for Aang. He waited for the eclipse. He waited for the comet. He spent 100 years training his patience until it was indistinguishable from his earthbending, which the show suggests is itself a kind of patience. Wait, listen, move when the moment is exactly right. Bumi is what the air nomad philosophy looks like when an earthbender lives it. He is also, quietly, the show's argument that not everyone who watched the genocide and the war happen was helpless. Some of them were just biding their time, with a precision Aang himself takes most of the series to learn. The Order of the White Lotus is one of the show's most underexplained organizations, and one of its richest. We learn early in the series, in Book 1, that Iroh plays a board game called Pai Sho, and that he uses the Lotus Tile as the center of his strategy. The Lotus Tile is a kind of password. It identifies him as a member of an old, secret society that crosses national borders, brings together masters of every discipline, and exists to preserve knowledge and beauty during dark times. The show reveals more in Book 3. The members include Bumi, Pakku, the waterbending master, Zheng, the deserter firebending master, Piandao, the sword master, and Iroh himself. How old the White Lotus is, who founded it, how it stayed hidden through 100 years of war, the show never tells you. Legend of Korra implies that by the time of Korra's training, the White Lotus has become a much more public and institutional organization, almost an avatar guard. By Korra's adulthood, that change is shown to have downsides as well as upsides. In the original series, though, the White Lotus is exactly what the world needed. A group of old men and women who recognized each other across borders, who had been waiting all along, who used a board game as a code so that they could meet without dying. The fact that the show never gives you their founding story is one of its great kindnesses. Some societies should remain a little mysterious to the people they protect. Iroh himself is the show's other great quiet mystery, and the one fans have written more about than perhaps any other character. The facts are simple. He was the heir to the Fire Nation throne. He led the first siege of Ba Sing Se. He failed to take the city. His only son, Lu Ten, died in the siege. Iroh withdrew, came home, and almost certainly underwent a spiritual transformation that the show only ever sketches. By the time Azulon was contemplating the succession, Iroh was no longer in the running. By the time the series begins, Iroh has chosen to follow his exiled nephew Zuko around the world rather than reclaim any political role. The thing fans have built theories around for years is what happened between Lu Ten's death and the start of the series. We know, from a single episode in Book 2 called The Tales of Ba Sing Se, that Iroh visits the spirit world. He has, in some manner, gone there and come back. The show never tells you what he did there, or how long it took, or whether he found Lu Ten. The implication is that he did go looking. The implication is that whatever he found there changed him in a way no other firebender in the show has been changed. By the finale, Iroh is the one who liberates Ba Sing Se, the city that took his son. That is not an accident. The show is letting you understand that Iroh has been carrying a private grief and a private peace, and that the peace took a long road through the spirit world before he could carry it home. Ursa, Zuko's mother, is the single mystery the original series carried as its longest unanswered question, and the comics, eventually, did answer it. Within the animated show, what we know is small and exact. We know that Ozai's father, Fire Lord Azulon, in a fit of rage over Iroh's apparent unfitness to inherit and over Ozai's request to take Iroh's place, ordered Ozai to kill Zuko as a punishment, to know the pain of losing a son. We know that the next morning Azulon was dead, and Ozai was Fire Lord, and Ursa was gone. We know the final image Zuko has of his mother is of her, in the night, telling him that everything she has done to protect him, that she loves him, that he must never forget who he is. That is all the original series gives you. The implication is enormous. Ursa, somehow, killed Azulon to save her son, and Ozai used the act to seize the throne, and Ursa was either banished or driven away. The fan theories that emerged in the gap between Book 3 and the comics ran in every direction. Ursa was alive. Ursa was a Kyoshi warrior. Ursa was secretly the Painted Lady. Ursa was June the bounty hunter, somehow, despite the timeline barely working. The comics, beginning with The Promise and culminating in the three-part series The Search, eventually delivered a version of the answer. Ursa, after engineering Azulon's death with a poison she had prepared specifically for the purpose, was banished by Ozai and given a single mercy, which was to live. She went home to the town she was born in, found the man she had loved before being forced into the royal marriage, and asked a spirit called the Mother of Faces to change her face so that she could begin again without the memory. She lived as a new woman named Noriko, married the man she loved, and had a daughter named Kii. Zuko, in the comics, finds her. The show itself does not tell you any of this. If you stop at the end of the animated series, Ursa is a closed door. That was a deliberate choice in the original writing room. Brian Konietzko and Michael DiMartino, in interviews around the end of the series, said the door was meant to feel open, like a question Zuko would carry for the rest of his life, and that the future would tell him in its own time. The comics chose to tell him. Whether the comics' answer is the right one is a matter you can decide for yourself. What the show wanted you to feel was the weight of not knowing. Azula is the show's most studied tragedy, and what makes her so heavy on the page is partly internal. She is the prodigy. She is the daughter who could perform every trick her brother could not. She is the child who, in Aang and Zuko's shared flashbacks, was already cruel at the age of 5, in the way precocious children sometimes are when they are using cruelty to test what the adults around them allow. Ozai allowed all of it. He praised her for it. By the time we meet her in Book 2, she is a teenage general capable of conquering Ba Sing Se by mostly talking. By the time we leave her at the end of Book 3, she is sitting on a stone in the courtyard of her family's palace, in chains, with her hair cut crooked by her own hand, weeping. The harder question underneath Azula is whether she could ever have been saved. The show takes a strong position on this without ever quite spelling it out. Azula was a child whose father praised her for being a weapon, and whose mother, by Azula's own memory, looked at her like she was already too sharp to love. The show is careful to suggest that Ursa did love her, and that Azula chose not to believe it, because believing it would have undone every story Ozai had built her around. By the finale, Azula's foundations are gone. Mai and Ty Lee, the friends she had used and frightened into staying, have left her. Her father has gone off to burn the Earth Kingdom without her. Her brother has chosen the people she hates. Her own firebending starts to crack, the blue flames running strange in her hands. And that is when the show shows you the picture you most need. She is a girl who was never given any structure to stand on except fear, and at the moment fear stops working, she has nothing else. The comics, particularly Smoke and Shadow, follow her into a kind of itinerant exile and a slow, jagged groping towards some better version of herself. The original series leaves you with her tears on the palace floor. Whether what is next for her is healing or further damage is a question fans have argued both ways for almost 20 years. The show, with great care, refuses to say. Zuko's scar is the most quietly studied wound in the show, and one of the few things the series sets a piece of myth around almost immediately and then takes apart. Early in Book 1, the dialogue suggests, without quite confirming, that Zuko was scarred by Ozai in an Agni Kai, a formal fire duel. Some early fans wondered whether the scar was older, from a household accident, from his mother's death, from something else. Book 3 confirms it. Zuko, as a 13-year-old, spoke out of turn in a war council, criticizing a general's plan that would have sacrificed Fire Nation soldiers as a feint. The general demanded an Agni Kai. Zuko, prepared to fight him, turned around in the dueling circle to find that the man waiting for him on the other side was not the general at all, but his own father, who said that because Zuko had disrespected the meeting, the disrespect was to him. Zuko, on his knees, refused to fight. Ozai burned the side of his son's face and banished him. The scar is a permanent visible record of a moment in which Zuko was punished for caring about other people's lives. The show is doing several things with this. It is telling you, early, that Ozai is not just an evil ruler, he is the kind of father who burns his 13-year-old son for showing kindness. It is telling you, with the scar's permanence, that Zuko cannot ever forget what his father is, because he sees the proof in every reflective surface. And it is telling you, by giving Zuko exactly that scar and exactly that origin, that Zuko's entire arc, his slow turn away from his father and towards something better, was always written into his skin. The scar is the mystery you stop wondering about and start understanding, very slowly, episode by episode. Koh the Face Stealer is the show's most unnerving spirit, and the questions around him have only grown the longer fans have looked at him. He lives, the series tells you, in an ancient tree in the spirit world, and he wears the faces he has taken from anyone who has shown emotion in front of him. Aang must consult him in Book 1, in the episode The Siege of the North, to learn how to save the moon spirit. Aang manages it by keeping his face perfectly still while Koh circles him in the dark, speaking in a voice that is at once a young man, an old woman, a giggling child, and something none of those things. Koh is not destroyed at the end of that visit. He is not even particularly inconvenienced. He simply withdraws, with one new face he was hoping to take and did not get. What lingers afterward is what exactly Koh is. The show suggests he is unimaginably old. He has hundreds of faces. He took Umi's face from Avatar Kuruk's bride. He has, by implication, taken the faces of people whose names we will never know. Fans have theorized that Koh was once human himself, that his original face is at the center of the spinning column on his body, and that the others are layered around it. Fans have also theorized that the spirit who became Koh was originally a benevolent face-shaping spirit, and that something corrupted him, perhaps a confrontation with his mother, the Mother of Faces, whom Korra meets generations later. None of that is confirmed inside Avatar, the Last Airbender. What the show does confirm is that Koh is patient, that he is amused by his work, that he is older than any human institution, and that he is still out there. He is one of the very few villains in the show that nobody defeats. He is simply someone you learn to manage. Wan Shi Tong is the spirit who built the library Aang's group finds in the desert in Book 2, the episode The Library, and his story is more about what he holds than what he is. Wan Shi Tong is a knowledge spirit, an enormous owl who has spent uncountable years gathering the written records of every civilization that has ever asked him for the privilege. He requires that visitors bring him something new. He revokes the privilege the moment he realizes that a visitor is using his knowledge to harm someone else. Aang's group brings him a star chart that turns out to belong to a Fire Nation admiral, and Wan Shi Tong, betrayed, begins to sink the library back into the sand. The team escapes with one fragment of knowledge, the date of the next solar eclipse, which becomes the foundation of the Day of Black Sun invasion plan in Book 3. Everything else that was in that library is the part that haunts you. The text we glimpse in the background of the episode references politics, languages, biology, astronomy, military history, every discipline of every culture that ever wrote. Some of the writing on the walls hints at things the show never returns to. Older civilizations than the Four Nations, older bending forms, older spirits. The library, in the show's frame, is now buried in the desert again, with a wounded knowledge spirit inside it who has spent the time since being even less willing to share with humans. Whether the library has resurfaced in any way by the time of Legend of Korra is, in canon, ambiguous. The show implies that one of its great repositories of knowledge is sealed away, and that humanity has not yet earned the right to open it again. Wan Shi Tong is patient in a different way from Bumi. Bumi waited 100 years for one event. Wan Shi Tong is waiting until people change. The Painted Lady is a thread the show pulls on twice. In Book 3, in the episode of the same name, Katara takes on the costume and identity of the Painted Lady to help a Fire Nation village that has been poisoned by a nearby factory. The villagers believe in the Painted Lady as a local river spirit who once protected them, and Katara, frustrated by being told that they cannot get involved, decides that one night she can be the spirit they have been hoping for. By the end of the episode, the actual Painted Lady appears. She is real. She is a thin, glowing figure on the river who thanks Katara for what she has done and continues on her way. What lingers is what the Painted Lady was doing before Katara arrived, why she had not helped these villagers herself, and what she does in the rest of her existence. The implication, gentle and a little sad, is that spirits in this world have their own timescales, their own constraints, their own losses. The Painted Lady was, perhaps, weakened by the pollution of her river. Perhaps she was simply waiting for the humans to do their part first. The show does not say. What the show does say, by showing her at all, is that Katara's compassion was correct, that the spirit it was modeled after was real, and that the spirit was grateful. That is a very small kindness for the show to extend, and it does it as casually as possible. The Painted Lady is not a major spirit. She is not Koh. She is a river spirit in a small Fire Nation town, and she is real. The world is full of small spirits and small kindnesses. That is part of what the show is telling you. The Mother of Faces is the spirit who, in Korra, gives Ursa a new face so that she can begin again. She is not introduced in the original animated series, but her existence reframes the entire mythology of Koh. If Koh is the Face Stealer, the Mother of Faces is the Face Giver. They are, in the broader canon, related, mother and son. And one of the great quiet implications of the comics and Korra together is that Koh is what happens to a child of a creator spirit who decides to start taking instead of being given. Within Avatar: The Last Airbender, before any of this is on the table, the idea is much simpler. Faces in this world are not just biology. They are a thing spirits can shape. They are a thing spirits can take. They are a thing that, in the spirit world's economy, has value and meaning. The show plants that idea quietly and never quite cashes it in, leaving the comics and Korra to do the work. But once you know it, you cannot unknow it. Every time someone in the show takes on a disguise, takes on a persona, hides their face behind a mask, the show is brushing the edge of an idea that the wider canon eventually says aloud. Faces are not fixed. The Painted Lady can choose hers. Ursa can choose hers. The Blue Spirit, which is Zuko in a mask, is choosing his. Faces are the start of identity, not the end of it. Hei Bai is the forest spirit Aang meets in Book 1, in the episode The Spirit World. Hei Bai is a panda by day and a six-legged black and white monster by night, and he is rampaging through a village because the Fire Nation has burned down his forest. Aang resolves the situation, after a struggle, by understanding what has happened and showing Hei Bai a single small acorn from the burnt grove, a sign that the forest will grow back. Hei Bai calms, returns the villagers he has taken, and resumes his original form. What lingers afterward is whether the forests of this world routinely have spirits like him. The implication, in everything the show shows you later, is yes. Every old grove has a spirit. Every old mountain has a spirit. Every river, every cave, every season has its spirits. The world in Avatar is layered. Hei Bai is just the spirit that happens to need Aang's attention that week. There are others, the show implies, who handle their grief without ever needing a human to come and see them. They simply go quiet, or they leave, or they linger in their burnt forests waiting for the trees to come back on their own. Hei Bai is the show's first illustration that the spirit world is not separate. It is woven into the geography. Touch a place hard enough and the spirit underneath will respond. That is one of the show's most consistent quiet theses. Oma and Shu are the two lovers buried inside the show's most famous side episode, The Cave of Two Lovers in Book 2. They were the two earthbenders, one from each of two warring villages, who met in a secret cave under the mountain between their homes and fell in love. They learned earthbending from the badger moles, the original earthbenders, and they used it to carve passages so they could meet. When Shu was killed in the war between their villages, Oma used her grief and her bending to threaten both villages with destruction, then chose mercy and ordered them to make peace. The two villages became one city, the city of Omashu, named after them. The deeper teaching, beyond the romance, is what the show is actually telling you about how bending began. Earthbenders, the show says here, did not invent earthbending. They learned it from the badger moles, the great blind creatures who live in the deep caves and see through the stone. Airbenders, you find out elsewhere, learned from the sky bison. Waterbenders learned from the moon, watching it pull the tides. Firebenders, the sun warriors will later tell you, learned from the dragons. Bending is taught by the animals. The lion turtles, in Wan's time, gave it. But the techniques themselves are inherited from the natural world. Oma and Shu's story is one of the few times the show pauses to explain that genealogy in any detail, and it does it inside a love story. The Dai Li, founded by Avatar Kyoshi, are the show's most uncomfortable institution. By the time Aang and his friends arrive in Ba Sing Se in Book 2, the Dai Li are a secret police force that operates beneath the city, abducts dissidents, brainwashes them in a lake beneath a hidden island, and enforces a strict cultural rule that the war does not exist within the walls of the city. Their leader, Long Feng, is the Grand Secretariat, a title that in practice means he runs Ba Sing Se, while the Earth King performs only ceremonial functions. How this happened is not spelled out. Kyoshi founded the Dai Li to protect the city's cultural heritage. The series implies that over the centuries this mission drifted. By Long Feng's time, protecting cultural heritage had become protecting cultural ignorance. The Dai Li were the means by which the Earth King was kept from learning that there was a war outside his walls, on the grounds that knowing would unbalance the city. Long Feng's plan, executed across most of Book 2, was to keep Ba Sing Se isolated and stable forever, the war happening somewhere out beyond the walls, the city held in a kind of perpetual not knowing. The show, in its second-to-last episode of Book 2, has Azula arrive in the city, identify Long Feng as someone who can be flattered and outmaneuvered, and turn the Dai Li to her side. What the show leaves about the Dai Li is whether any institution founded with good intentions can be safely passed down for centuries. Kyoshi, 2 centuries earlier, would probably not have approved of what she had built. The Avatar institutions question is the show's quietest critique of the Avatar institution itself. Long Feng is one of the show's most subtle villains and one of its least explored. The series gives you his role, his methods, his ambition, and then takes him out of the way by having Azula simply outdo him. He spends most of Book 2 as the most dangerous person in Ba Sing Se. He spends the end of Book 2 and most of Book 3 sitting in a prison cell, while Azula uses his Dai Li like instruments. Who he was before he became Grand Secretariat, the show does not say. There are no flashbacks, there is no backstory. There is only his presence, the precision of his manipulation of King Kui, the discipline of his Dai Li, and the way his power evaporates the moment a real predator arrives. He is one of the show's clearest illustrations of a kind of evil that thrives in stability. He is what happens when an institution becomes the man who runs it. When Azula displaces him, the Dai Li simply transfer their loyalty. He had no foundation underneath his power except the chair he was sitting in. The fan theories about Long Feng's origins, his earlier career, his earthbending tutelage have run for years. The show is silent. That silence is also a character choice. Long Feng is what he does. He does not need a backstory because he is the kind of villain who probably tells everyone a different one anyway. The Earth King Koh is the man Long Feng was using as a puppet, and his arc is one of the show's most quietly devastating small stories. He is a young, sheltered, deeply earnest ruler who has lived his entire life inside a palace, has never met anyone outside the city's nobility, and has, at the start of Book 2, no idea that there is a war happening on the other side of his walls. His pet bear, Bosco, is the only living being he can entirely trust. When the gang manages to reach him and tell him the truth, his entire framework collapses in real time. He is, on the page, exactly as old as the war that has been hidden from him, 100 years and one human lifetime in the same shape. His response is grief, and then resolve, and then a kind of disappearance. After Ba Sing Se falls to Azula, Koh goes into exile with Bosco. The comics give you a small amount of his recovery. The animated series mostly drops him after his story has done what it needed to do. What happens to a leader whose lifetime of inherited certainty turns out to be a lie is the question Koh carries on his back through the rest of the show. The series is gentle with him. It does not blame him for not knowing. It blames the institution that kept him from knowing. He is, in some ways, an echo of Aang, a child raised to be something the world needed and then betrayed by the conditions in which he was raised. The difference is that Aang gets to grow up and decide what kind of avatar he is going to be. Koh spends his life learning what kind of king he was already prevented from being. Bosco the bear deserves a brief mention of his own, because he is one of the show's most successful running jokes about how strange Avatar's animal kingdom is. Almost every animal in the show is a hybrid. There are turtle ducks, sky bison, flying lemurs, koala otters, polar bear dogs, dragon moose. Bosco is described, repeatedly, as just a bear. No qualifier, no second species, just a bear. The joke is that in this world the absence of a second animal in the name is the strange thing. It is the closest the show gets to commenting on its own world building from inside the world. Bosco is a bear because Bosco is unique. Bosco lives in a palace because Bosco is the Earth King's friend. Whether there are other ordinary bears anywhere in this world, or whether the hybrids are the rule and Bosco is a strange exception, the show, with a small grin, refuses to clarify. Combustion Man is the third assassin Zuko hires in Book 3. The silent firebender who can produce explosions by focusing his bending through a third eye tattooed on his forehead. He never speaks. He is never named within the series. He is called Combustion Man by Sokka, who likes to give nicknames, and the writers and fans adopted it. Almost everything about him is left blank. We do not know where he learned his technique. We do not know whether he is the only person who can do it. We do not know how the tattoo and the technique are related, whether the tattoo is the source or just a focus. We know that he can be defeated by interrupting his concentration, and that Sokka eventually does so by hitting him in the forehead with a boomerang at the worst possible moment for him. By most accounts, the writers liked the idea of him as a kind of nameless walking weapon, a man whose entire identity is the thing he can do. Within Korra, combustion bending appears again, in the form of a character called Pali, who is Zahir's partner in the Red Lotus, and who explicitly has the same kind of third eye tattoo and the same kind of technique. The implication is that combustion bending is a rare but transmissible art, taught in some hidden corner of the world. Whether Combustion Man learned it from anyone, or whether he discovered it himself, is something the show never resolves. The show keeps him a closed mouth, and that is part of why he works. June the Bounty Hunter appears twice in the series, once in Book 1, in the episode Bateau of the Water Tribe, and once in Book 3, when Iroh, briefly free, hires her to find a member of the Order of the White Lotus. She rides a giant Shirshu, a blind creature that hunts by smell, and she is one of the few neutral parties in the entire war. She is not aligned with the Fire Nation. She is not aligned with the Earth Kingdom or the Water Tribes. She works for money. She drinks. She survives. Whether she has a longer story we are not being told is one of the threads the show simply leaves dangling. Some fans have theorized that she is a deserter from one of the nations, or that she is the secret descendant of an avatar, or that she will eventually be revealed to be Ursa. None of those theories are confirmed, and the Ursa one was specifically closed by the comics. What is confirmed is that June, in a world where everyone is taking sides, has chosen not to. That position is its own statement. Some people, during a 100-year war, decide that the war is not their war. They make a living. They keep moving. June is the show's quiet acknowledgement that not everyone in the world has to be a hero, and that some of the most useful people in the world are the ones who are simply available for hire. Jet is the show's most haunting recurring character, and his fate is the show's most precise gut punch. Jet is introduced in Book 1, in the episode of his name, as the charismatic teenage leader of a band of orphans who have been fighting a guerrilla war against the Fire Nation in the forests of the Earth Kingdom. He almost convinces Sokka and Katara to help him drown a Fire Nation village to take out a single garrison. When Aang and Sokka realize the plan would kill innocent people, they stop him. Jet, embarrassed and angry, disappears. He reappears in Book 2, on a refugee ferry to Ba Sing Se, having grown a little, having begun to question himself.
He becomes a friend, of a kind. Inside Ba Sing Se, he becomes convinced that Iroh and Zuko are Fire Nation infiltrators, which they are, and his attempt to expose them gets him picked up by the Dai Li and brainwashed in their underground facility beneath Lake Laogai.
When the gang frees him, Jet recovers his memories in time to lead them to the Dai Li's facility, where Long Feng, in a fight in the center of the underground chamber, strikes him. Jet falls. Katara tries to heal him. The show frames it ambiguously. Sokka asks if he is going to be okay. Toph, who can sense whether people are telling the truth, simply looks at the others. Aang, Katara, Sokka, and Toph leave Jet's friends to look after him. The series never returns to him. What the show leaves you with great deliberation, is whether Jet died there, in the dark under the city, on Long Feng's order, surrounded by friends who had to leave him. The creators have, in interviews and panels, said that yes, he died. They wrote the scene as a death, and could not say it aloud on a children's network in the form they wanted. The way they framed it, with the survivors looking at each other and Sokka asking the question and Toph not answering, is the way they wrote his death without writing it. What stays with you is not what happened. It is why the show chose to leave it ambiguous. The answer is that ambiguity, for the people who loved Jet, is how grief actually feels. Hama and Bloodbending arrive in Book 3, in the episode The Puppet Master, and they are one of the show's most carefully placed darkenings. Hama is an old woman who runs an inn in a small Fire Nation town. She takes Katara in, befriends her, teaches her. She is also one of the last Southern Water Tribe waterbenders, captured by the Fire Nation in a raid during the early decades of the war. She spent decades in a Fire Nation prison, where the captors had taken every precaution against waterbending, with one mistake. They had not realized that the human body itself is water. Hama, alone in her cell at night, watched rats scurry along the floor and slowly worked out that on the full moon, when her bending was strongest, she could reach through them, into the water inside them, and move their bodies. She called the technique bloodbending. She used it on her guards. She escaped. She walked across the Fire Nation and built herself a quiet life in a town where she watches other old people disappear during the full moon, and she takes them. She has not stopped. By the time Katara meets her, Hama has decided that she will pass the technique down before she dies, that someone has to know what the Fire Nation made of her. Katara, by the end of the episode, has been forced to use bloodbending herself to stop Hama from controlling her brother and her friends. Hama, watching her, smiles. She has succeeded. What the show leaves you with is what happens to bloodbending after Hama. Katara, in the original series, refuses to use the technique again, and the show treats it as the worst kind of waterbending, a perversion. Korra, generations later, shows you that the technique not only continues to exist, but is mastered to such a degree by a man named Yakone that he can bloodbend without a full moon, in daylight, with his eyes open. Whether one woman's revenge in a Fire Nation prison cell becomes one of the most dangerous bending techniques in the world's history is a question the wider canon answers with a yes. Hama, by the time of Korra's adulthood, has changed the rules of waterbending forever, and most people do not know her name. The Swamp Benders are introduced in Book 2, in the episode The Swamp, and they are the show's most underused community. They are a small group of waterbenders who live in a marsh in the Earth Kingdom, far from any of the water tribes, and they have developed a regional style that uses plant water, the water inside vines and roots and trees, rather than open water. Their leader, Hu, is a man with a long beard who explains that the swamp is one giant living organism, that every tree is connected to every other tree through a massive banyan grove tree at the center, that all life is connected the way the swamp is connected, and that what looks like separate beings is really one being looking at itself. He turns himself into a kind of plant golem to demonstrate, using the swamp water to wear vines like armor. What lingers about the swamp benders is how this lineage existed at all. Waterbending, the rest of the show insists, comes from the poles. The northern and southern water tribes are the cultural home of the discipline. The swamp benders, somewhere in the middle of the Earth Kingdom, have an entire separate tradition, a separate spiritual frame, a separate technique. Either they descend from waterbenders who migrated centuries ago and forgot they were from the poles, or they discovered waterbending independently inside the swamp's own ecosystem, or the show is hinting that bending traditions arose in more places than the official story acknowledges. The show never says. The banyan grove tree itself, which Aang touches and uses to enter the avatar state briefly, becomes one of the show's most beautiful images of interconnection, a tree that contains every other tree, a network underneath the world that the swamp benders can hear when nobody else can. Guru Pathak is one of the show's most enigmatic mentors, and his role in Aang's arc is one of the show's most quietly contested choices. Pathak appears at the Eastern Air Temple in late Book 2, having lived there for decades after befriending Aang's old guardian monk Gyatso. He is an old man, not an airbender, who has read deeply into the spiritual traditions of the air nomads and has been waiting for the avatar to arrive so that he can teach him how to control the avatar state. The avatar state, Pathak explains, is fully accessible only when the 7 chakras of the body are open, and the 7 chakras are blocked by attachments, fears, and griefs that the avatar must let go of. He guides Aang through each one, in a sequence that is one of the show's most patient and most meditative passages, and at the 7th chakra he tells Aang that, to truly enter the avatar state at will, Aang must release his attachment to Katara. Aang refuses. The avatar state is not opened. The next thing that happens is that Azula shoots him with lightning in the catacombs beneath Ba Sing Se, while he is trying to enter that state through a different door, and his connection to the previous avatars is, for a long time, broken. What hovers around Pathak is whether his teaching was correct. Fans have argued about this for years. The conservative reading is that yes, Aang should have released his attachment to Katara, that releasing love is a different thing from ceasing to love, and that Aang's refusal cost him the avatar state at the worst possible moment. The romantic reading is that Pathak was applying an air nomad teaching to a person who was not just an air nomad, that Aang's love for Katara is one of the things that grounds him in the world he is meant to save, and that he was right to refuse. The show, in its 3rd book, more or less takes the romantic side. Aang regains the avatar state, defeats Ozai, ends up with Katara, and the universe more or less endorses the choice. But Pathak's question remains. The avatar is a creature of attachments, so is everyone. The teaching is, perhaps, only partly transferable. The Mechanist is one of the show's most quietly tragic characters. He is the father of Teo, a paraplegic boy who flies on a glider in the Northern Air Temple. The Mechanist, before the war, was an inventor whose village was destroyed by a Fire Nation attack. His wife was killed in the attack. Their son Teo lost the use of his legs. The Mechanist, in the wake of the disaster, took the survivors to the abandoned Northern Air Temple, where they have lived for years, building inventions out of the old air nomad workshops. By the time we meet him in Book 1, he is providing weapons technology to the Fire Nation in exchange for being left alone, a bargain he keeps secret from his son. When Aang and the others find out, the Mechanist is forced to choose between continuing the bargain or risking the destruction of his community. He chooses to fight. What lingers about him is what kind of man he was before he became a collaborator. His inventions, when used for the war on the side of the resistance in Book 3, are decisive. He builds the submarines for the day of Black Sun invasion. He is one of the people quietly responsible for the war's logistics turning. The show never gives him a deep redemption arc. It simply lets him keep making things, keep helping where he can. He is, in his way, the show's argument that even people who made bad bargains in the worst years of the war can be useful to its end. The wife he lost is named in the comics and in supplementary material. In the show itself, she is an absence the Mechanist works around. He invents because his wife and his son's legs are not there. He keeps inventing because the world keeps asking him to. That is one of the quietest griefs the show puts on screen. Toph's parents are the show's case study in what a comfortable life can do to a child. They are wealthy landowners in the Earth Kingdom, in a place called Gaoling, where Toph is hidden away from the public eye because she was born blind. The Beifong family is one of the wealthiest in the Earth Kingdom, and the comics expand on the family's economic and political influence in considerable detail. The parents, in the original series, decided early on that Toph's blindness made her fragile, and they have devoted her childhood to keeping her sheltered. What they do not know is that Toph, taught earthbending by the badger moles in caves near her home, is one of the most powerful earthbenders alive. She runs away to join Aang's group in Book 2, against her parents' wishes, and her arc is, in part, about choosing the family she has found over the family she was given. What the show leaves you with about the Beifongs is whether they ever come to understand who their daughter actually is. The series is ambiguous. The comics give them a longer reconciliation, particularly in The Rift, which centers on Toph's history with her father. By the time of Legend of Korra, Toph has founded a Metalbending academy, become the first chief of police of Republic City, had 2 daughters, raised them imperfectly, and become a kind of estranged matriarch of her own. The Beifong story keeps going. The show itself gives you the moment of departure and the slow softening that begins in The Rift. The unanswered part is everything that happens in between. How a girl raised behind walls becomes a woman who lives in a swamp at the end of her life, and how the people she came from did or did not reach her again. Toph's discovery of metalbending in the finale of Book 2 is one of the show's most thrilling moments and the start of one of its most consequential mysteries. Toph is captured by a group of bounty hunters and put in a metal cage, on the assumption that, because earthbending works on earth and not on processed metal, she will be unable to escape. She works out, in real time, that processed metal still contains tiny impurities of earth, and that if she concentrates she can feel them and bend the metal around them. She becomes the first metalbender. The implication is enormous. For the entire history of the Earth Kingdom, no earthbender had ever realized this. Cities had been built on the assumption that metal contained benders. Prisons had been built. The Fire Nation's whole industrial base, particularly its ships and its tanks, had been built on the assumption that metal was safe from earthbenders. Toph, alone, demolishes that assumption. By the time of Legend of Korra, metalbending is a recognized discipline, taught widely, used by the police force of Republic City, which Toph herself founded. How a technique that obvious in retrospect could have escaped 100 generations of earthbenders is the deeper question her discovery opens. The show implies that it took someone who saw the world in a fundamentally different way to spot it. Toph, blind from birth, perceives earth through vibration, through the touch of her feet on the ground. She does not look at metal as a finished object the way other earthbenders do. She feels the earth still trapped inside it. The larger version of the question is, how many other bending techniques are sitting like that, obvious in retrospect, waiting for the bender whose perception is different enough to find them? Lava bending, swamp bending, plant bending, healing, blood bending, metal bending, lightning generation, and eventually the discoveries of Korra's era all suggest that the 4 nations have only ever scratched the surface of what bending is. The lion turtle, in the finale, takes that thought a step further. The 4 elements, he says, were only ever a starting point. Lightning generation and lightning redirection are the show's most explicitly described firebending techniques, and they sit at the center of one of the show's quieter mysteries. Iroh, in Book 2, teaches Zuko how to redirect lightning by routing it through the body. The route, as Iroh explains it, runs from the fingertips of one arm, down through the arm to the stomach, around the stomach, up through the other arm, and out through the fingertips of that side. Iroh is explicit that the lightning must not pass through the heart. He explains that he learned the technique by studying waterbenders. That is the first time the show has confirmed that benders have ever borrowed techniques from each other across nations. It implies a much older and more porous bending culture than the war has allowed. It also implies that there are other techniques like this, lying just out of view. Iroh himself, in the finale, is described as having studied the bending arts of all 4 nations, and the implication is that his firebending is the better for it. Lightning generation, separately, is described as requiring an inner calm and a separation of positive and negative energy. Iroh is one of the only people in the show who can generate it. Ozai and Azula can. Azula's Dai Li breaks down precisely because she loses the calm required, and her lightning, in her final duel with Zuko, no longer strikes where she means it to. Lightning is one of the show's clearest emotional barometers. People who can do it are people who can sit inside themselves. People who cannot are people whose insides are too loud. That is one of the show's most efficient pieces of characterization, hidden inside what looks like a power level. The Day of Black Sun is the centerpiece of the second half of Book 3, and one of the show's most carefully built set pieces. The plan, drawn from the scroll that Aang's group retrieved from Wan Shi Tong's library, is that on the day of a total solar eclipse, firebenders will lose their bending for the duration of the eclipse, and the Fire Nation will be vulnerable to a surprise invasion. The Order of the White Lotus is not yet active. The plan is being carried out by Sokka's father Hakoda's small army of Water Tribe warriors, Earth Kingdom resistance fighters, swamp benders, the Mechanist and his inventions, and Aang's group. They reach the capital. They breach the defenses. They begin the assault, and then, as Aang descends to confront Ozai, he finds that Ozai is not in the palace. Ozai has been moved. The Fire Nation knew the invasion was coming, because Azula, somewhere along the line, learned of it, and the entire war room of the Fire Lord was a decoy. The eclipse comes and goes. The army is captured. Aang, the children, and Hakoda's surviving lieutenants escape. The Day of Black Sun ends with an enormous loss. What the show leaves you with is whether the plan was always too ambitious, or whether the leak was the only difference between victory and defeat. The show takes the position that even with surprise, the plan would not have ended the war by itself. Sozin's comet, 3 months later, would have arrived and given the Fire Nation enough firebending power to repulse the invasion anyway. The Day of Black Sun, in retrospect, was a feint. It was the show telling you that the small win was never the answer, that the comet was the answer, and that everything that mattered was going to happen on the comet's day, with Aang facing Ozai alone. Sozin's comet is the show's clock. It returns, the series says, once every 100 years. Sozin himself used it to power the air nomad genocide. Ozai plans to use it to burn the Earth Kingdom to the ground in a single day, then rule the ashes. The comet's nature is one of the show's quieter mysteries. Why does it amplify firebending and not the other three? The implication, drawn from Wan's beginnings episodes in Korra, is that the comet is connected somehow to the sun, the original source of firebending. Firebending is fueled by the sun, which is why firebenders are stronger during the day. The comet passing close to the Earth intensifies that connection in a way the moon never quite does for waterbenders, even though the moon is firebending's mirror in the other direction. The show does not explain whether the other three elements have their own celestial bodies, whose passage would amplify them. There is no shown comet for water, earth, or air. The implication, never quite confirmed, is that the comet is a fire phenomenon because firebending is the element most easily tied to a single celestial source. Water, earth, and air have more dispersed origins. What hovers around the comet is whether the world's history is, in some sense, structured by it. Every 100 years, the comet returns, and the Fire Nation has the chance to do something terrible. Sozin took the chance. Ozai tried to take the chance. Whether the previous comets, in centuries before Sozin, had similar moments of temptation, is something the show simply does not show you. The Avatar, the show seems to be saying, exists in part to handle the cycle that the comet keeps spinning. Aang's choice in the finale, not to kill Ozai, is the choice he makes inside the moment the comet has built. Aang's reluctance to kill is the most quietly debated of all the show's choices. The air nomads, as a culture, are pacifists. Killing is not just discouraged but spiritually forbidden. Aang, in the lead-up to the finale, consults his past lives. Roku tells him to be decisive. Kyoshi tells him that, in her view, the only difference between her style and his is that she was willing to do what was necessary. Kuruk tells him to act without hesitation. Yang Chen, his own air nomad predecessor, tells him that the Avatar is no longer truly free, that the duty supersedes the discipline. All 4 past Avatars, in their own way, tell him to kill Ozai. Aang refuses. He spends the days before the comet's arrival looking for an alternative. He is washed up on the lion turtle's back. He learns energy bending. He defeats Ozai by removing Ozai's firebending entirely. The question fans have argued for nearly 20 years is whether the show endorses Aang's choice. The show, in its final image, gives Aang the win. The world is saved. Ozai is alive but powerless. Zuko becomes Fire Lord. The Avatar's pacifism is vindicated. But the show also gives you, just before, the moment when every past Avatar told him otherwise. The fan argument is whether the lion turtle was a deus ex machina that let the writers have it both ways, or whether the show is doing something subtler, telling you that the Avatar's job is to find third options that the previous Avatars could not see. The honest reading is that both are partly true. The lion turtle is convenient. Aang's refusal is also genuinely brave. The show ends on a balance the past avatars themselves could not strike. The avatar after Aang, Korra, will run into the same question in her own time and answer it her own way. Aang's chakras, blocked at the end of Book 2 by his refusal to release Katara, become unblocked at the climax of Book 3 through a different door. After Azula's lightning hits him at the end of Book 2, Aang's connection to the previous avatars is severed. In Book 3, in the episode Sozin's Comet Part 2, he is washed up on the lion turtle's back, and the lion turtle teaches him energy bending. Before the final confrontation, Aang is fighting Ozai and is knocked into a pile of rocks. The impact of a single rock against his back in the precise place where Azula's lightning had hit him unseats the block. The chakra opens. The avatar state floods in. He defeats Ozai, partly in the avatar state and partly in energy bending, with the lion turtle's instruction in his ears. The quiet question is whether the writers intended that physical opening of the chakra to be a kind of cheat or a kind of grace. The show is honest about it. Aang did not work his way back to the avatar state through meditation. He was knocked into it by an accident in a fight. The show is telling you that sometimes the path through is not the path the teacher described. Sometimes the universe simply gives you the moment, and your job is to be ready when it does. Pathik would, probably, have approved. The avatar state itself is the show's most powerful and most fragile gift. It is the state in which the avatar can draw on every previous avatar's knowledge and skill, channel all 4 elements at once, and operate at a level beyond ordinary bending. It is also extremely dangerous to the avatar. If the avatar is killed in the avatar state, the entire cycle is broken, and there will be no more avatars. Azula's lightning in Book 2 is precisely calibrated to kill Aang in the avatar state, and it nearly does. What hangs over the avatar state is how the cycle can be so fragile and so resilient at once. The show, by the end, restores both Aang's connection and the cycle, but only just. Korra, generations later, will discover that her own connection to the previous avatars can be severed by a different kind of attack, and that the cycle, when broken, must be rebuilt rather than restored. Whether Aang understood, at any point in the series, how close he came to ending the entire institution is something the show implies he did. The lion turtle implies he did. The past avatars, in the moments they get to speak, imply he did. The avatar state is the most powerful thing in the world and the most precarious thing in the world, and Aang spends most of the series unable to control it and the rest of the series learning that controlling it is partly a matter of not relying on it. The moon spirit and the ocean spirit, Tui and La, are the 2 most important spirits in the original series, and their story carries one of the show's most beautiful and most sorrowful threads. Tui and La are introduced in the Book 1 finale, the 2-part episode, The Siege of the North, in the form of 2 koi fish, one white and one black, swimming around each other in an endless circle in a small oasis at the heart of the Northern Water Tribe. They are the original spirits who, the show tells you, gave waterbending to humans by example. The first waterbenders learned by watching the moon pull the tides. Tui and La pushed themselves out of the spirit world into the human world, took the form of fish, and never separated. When Admiral Zhao attacks the Northern Water Tribe and, in a moment of theological catastrophe, kills Tui in the oasis, the moon goes dark, the tides stop, all waterbending in the world becomes inert. La, in grief and rage, fuses with Aang in the avatar state, and becomes a colossal water spirit that wipes the Fire Nation fleet from the harbor. Princess Yue, the daughter of the chief of the Northern Water Tribe, who had been saved as an infant by Tui's blessing, gives her life back to the moon to restore the spirit. The moon returns. Yue becomes the moon spirit. Sokka, who had fallen in love with her, has to watch her body become a body of light and rise into the sky. What the show leaves you with is everything about how this kind of exchange works, the metaphysics of giving life back to a spirit, the question of whether Yue is still in any sense Yue. The series implies that she is. Yue appears as a guiding presence later in the series, and in the spirit world she helps Aang when he asks. The show is gentle about it. Yue gave her life to save the world. The world made her into the world's most quietly present spirit. Sokka, who loved her, lives the rest of his life with the moon overhead, and the show is honest enough to let that hurt without letting it destroy him. The story of Tui and La is the show at its most committed to its own spirituality. The spirits are real. They can be killed, they can be replaced, they can love and be loved. There are consequences when humans interfere with them, and there are people who, when asked, will give themselves to keep the balance going. The spirit world itself is one of the show's most beautifully underexplained settings. We see it directly only a handful of times across the series. Aang visits it in Book 1 when he is taken there by Heibai's transformation. He visits it again in The Siege of the North when he has to find Koh and beg him for the moon spirit's location. He visits it briefly in Book 2 and again in Book 3. The geography of the spirit world is non-Euclidean. Distance is emotional. Time runs at a different speed there than in the human world. Spirits manifest as they choose. There is no clear capital, no clear council, no clear ruling structure. Wan Shi Tong, in his library, says that he came to bury his collection in the human world so that the spirits could not interfere with the knowledge. The implication is that the spirit world has its own politics, its own factions, its own arguments, and that the spirits are not unified about how to relate to humanity. The series gives you only glimpses. The Korra sequel will eventually open the spirit world wide, especially during harmonic convergence, when the two worlds blur and humans and spirits begin to live alongside each other in much more direct ways. Within the original show, the spirit world is what waits behind the curtain. You are welcome there only sometimes. You leave changed. Sokka is the only non-bender in the central group, and the show makes his role much more important than it would have been in a less careful series. The quiet question the show invites around Sokka is whether he is, in some sense, the most necessary member of the team. He is the planner. He is the strategist who sees the Day of Black Sun in the library scroll and turns it into a war plan. He is the swordsman, trained later in the series by Piandao the White Lotus Master. He is the inventor, working out angles for boomerangs and gliders. He is the joke teller, which the show consistently treats as a serious skill, the kind of social work that keeps a group of traumatized teenagers from falling apart in the middle of a war. Whether he would have been the leader of the team if he had been a bender is the harder version of that question. The show takes the position that he is, in a quiet way, already the leader. Aang is the avatar. Katara is the heart. Toph is the muscle. Zuko, when he joins, is the conscience by way of his own redemption. Sokka is the brain and the structure. The team would have been alive, but unfocused without him. Sokka's arc is one of the show's quietest pieces of inclusion. The non-bender, in a story about bending, is essential. The show, by the time of Legend of Korra, will go further with this, building entire conflicts around the political fights between benders and non-benders. In the original series, Sokka simply does the work. Whether the show ever quite gives him credit for it is a question. The fans, mostly, have. Suki and the Kyoshi warriors carry one of the show's most underdeveloped lineages. Suki is the leader of the Kyoshi warriors, a group of women who guard Kyoshi Island and who train in a martial style that, the show says, is based on the techniques Avatar Kyoshi herself used in her time. They wear face paint modeled on Kyoshis. They use metal fans. They are skilled enough to capture Sokka, Aang, and Katara when they first arrive on the island in Book 1. By Book 2, the Kyoshi warriors have left their island and are traveling to help the war effort, until they are ambushed by Azula and captured. Azula, Mai, and Ty Lee then take the Kyoshi warriors' uniforms and use the disguises to infiltrate Ba Sing Se as part of Azula's plan. Suki herself is held in prison for most of the show, until Sokka rescues her in Book 3. What the show leaves you with about the Kyoshi warriors is what their tradition really is. The show implies a continuous lineage from Avatar Kyoshi herself, a chain of teachers and students stretching back roughly 2 centuries. The wider canon, in the Kyoshi novels, fills in a much more complicated picture, including the original group of women who guarded Kyoshi herself in her travels. By the time of Suki's leadership, the techniques are still intact, but the larger spiritual context of the original group has thinned. Suki's role in the show is, at its best, to be the calm and competent presence that Sokka needs, and to embody the Avatar Kyoshi tradition that the show otherwise mostly tells you about through Kyoshi's own brief spirit appearances. The fan complaint, fairly consistently, has been that the show does not give Suki enough time. The implicit question is what her life looked like when she was not on screen. The comics give her a little more. The original series keeps her quietly in the background of a story that always seems on the verge of finally centering her, and then does not quite. Mai's family is one of the show's most quietly political subplots. Mai is the daughter of a high-ranking Fire Nation governor, the man who is appointed by Ozai to govern the conquered city of Omashu, renamed New Ozai for the duration. Mai is bored. She is in love with Zuko. She is loyal to Azula in the way one is loyal to the queen of one's school clique, which is to say, not loyal at all when the stakes get real. Her family, in Book 2, is briefly entangled with an Earth Kingdom resistance group that includes a child named Tom Tom, Mai's younger brother. The episode is a comedy, mostly, but it lets the show do something quietly serious. Mai's family is part of the Fire Nation occupation. They are, in the moral terms the show is building, on the wrong side. Mai herself eventually defects from Azula in the climactic episode at the Boiling Rock prison, when she chooses Zuko over Azula's vengeance. What the show leaves you with about Mai's family is what happens to them in the New World after the war. The comics, particularly Smoke and Shadow, give Mai's family a more complicated post-war arc, including her father's involvement in a group called the New Ozai Society. The animated series leaves them in a kind of suspended ambiguity. Mai is on the right side now. Her family is what it was. Whether reconciliation across that gap is possible is a question the comics answer partly. The show, more reservedly, leaves it for after the curtain. Ty Lee is the show's most quietly subversive fighter. She is one of Azula's friends, recruited from a circus to help with Azula's mission in Book 2, and her skill is a technique called chi blocking. By striking precise points on a person's body, Ty Lee can temporarily disable their bending. The show plants without elaborating the question of what chi blocking actually is. It is clearly an old discipline, taught somewhere outside the bending traditions, by someone whose lineage the show does not give you. It is also, by implication, an enormously powerful technique. In the right hands, chi blocking can disable a master bender for hours. By the time of Legend of Korra, an entire revolutionary movement, the Equalists, will be built around chi blocking as the great equalizer between benders and non-benders. Ty Lee, in the original series, is mostly a comedic and tactical figure. By the end of Book 3, she has joined the Kyoshi warriors. Her chi blocking, in that context, becomes a discipline taught alongside the Kyoshi tradition. How the technique originally arose is something the wider canon implies came from the same circus tradition that Ty Lee herself was raised in, but the show is more interested in what she does with it than where it came from. Ty Lee is the show's quiet illustration that bending is not the only path to power, and that anyone who builds a culture around the assumption that benders are inherently superior is building on sand. The Cabbage Merchant is, in its way, the show's most beloved running joke and one of its most consistent quiet questions. He is an unnamed Earth Kingdom vendor who appears in episode after episode of the early seasons, always pushing a cart of cabbages, always crying out, always seeing his cabbages destroyed by some passing catastrophe involving Aang's group. He has no backstory. He has no arc. He has no name within the series. Whether the show, in some kindness, ever lets him succeed is what the fans wondered for a long time. The Cabbage Merchant became a kind of folk character within the fandom, and Legend of Korra eventually gives a wink to him by introducing Cabbage Corp, a major Republic City corporation founded, by the show's own implication, by one of his descendants. That is the show's joke. The Cabbage Merchant, through perseverance and a long view of life, becomes the founder of a corporate dynasty. What he was outside the brief moments we see him is left to your imagination. The show implies, with affection, that he was simply a man trying to sell cabbages, while the most important war in a century happened in his immediate vicinity. The fact that he kept going is the show's quietest piece of optimism. People do simply keep going. Most of the world, in the middle of a 100-year war, is composed of people pushing carts of cabbages. The Foggy Swamp Tribe leads us back to the question of how widely waterbending traditions actually spread. The Foggy Swamp Tribe is a small group of waterbenders living in the swamp at the center of the Earth Kingdom. They have been there long enough to develop their own dialect, their own clothing, their own spiritual practice, and their own bending style. The show implies that they migrated from the Southern Water Tribe centuries ago and lost touch with their origins. Some fans have argued the opposite, that waterbending arose independently in multiple ecosystems, the poles and the swamp at minimum, and that the Northern Water Tribe's story about being the original waterbenders is partly a regional self-promotion. The show is ambiguous. The swamp benders themselves are not particularly interested in lineage. They are interested in the swamp. Their leader Hu's central teaching, that all life is connected through the banyan grove tree, is closer to the air nomad's philosophy than to the northern water tribe's strict hierarchies. What lingers, after the swamp benders, is whether the show is suggesting that bending, in its purest form, is regional, that every place has its own tradition shaped by its own ecology, and that the four neat nations are a recent flattening of a much more varied truth. The Lion Turtle's words in the finale support that reading. The four elements were a beginning, not an end. The swamp is just an early variation that survived. The foggy swamp also gives us one of the show's most quietly weird visions. When Aang, Katara, and Sokka first arrive in the swamp itself shows each of them a vision. Aang sees a girl in an air nomad robe spinning in a meadow. Katara sees her mother. Sokka sees Yue, who has just become the moon spirit. Yue later explains that the swamp shows people what they need to see, that the visions are pulled from inside them rather than imposed from outside. The strangest of those visions, the one the show is doing the most work with, is the girl Aang sees, who turns out to be Toph, before he has met her. The swamp showed him the future. The show treats the moment matter-of-factly. The swamp is connected to the spirit world in ways the show does not fully explain. Time, in the swamp, is not entirely fixed. Aang, taught to trust his instincts about the visions, eventually finds Toph in the next arc of the series. What hovers afterward is whether other places have similar properties, and the show simply did not have time to visit them. The Korra sequel will eventually do more with the swamp, with Toph living there in retirement and the swamp's connection to the spirit world made more explicit. In the original series, the swamp is just a place where the rules are slightly thinner and the visions are real. Iroh's full biography is the most studied of any character outside the main four, and the show, with great care, leaves enormous parts of it for you to assemble. We know he was the eldest son of Fire Lord Azulon. We know he was the heir to the throne. We know he led the first siege of Ba Sing Se, which lasted, the show implies, more than 2 years. We know his son Lu Ten died during that siege. We know Iroh, in the wake of Lu Ten's death, withdrew, abandoned the siege, and returned home. We know he was passed over for the throne in favor of his younger brother, Ozai. We know that he became part of the Order of the White Lotus, perhaps as one of its leading figures. We know that he traveled, that he visited the Sun Warriors, that he learned firebending from the dragons Ran and Shaw, that he visited the spirit world, that he made tea, that he developed the lightning redirection technique by studying waterbenders. We know that by the time the series begins, he is voluntarily following Zuko on a quest the rest of the world thinks is futile. The sequence is what the show withholds. We do not know whether the White Lotus came before the spirit world or after. We do not know whether the dragons came before Lu Ten or after. We do not know whether Iroh's tea preferences predate or postdate his transformation. The show simply gives you the man and lets you imagine the path. That is one of the show's most generous gestures toward its audience. Iroh is a man at the end of a long road. The road is for you to picture. Zuko's redemption is the show's most complete arc and one of the most studied character arcs in modern animation. He begins the series as the exiled prince hunting the Avatar in order to restore his honor. He ends the series as the Fire Lord, sitting on his father's throne, having chosen, repeatedly, to risk everything he was raised to want in order to do something else. When, exactly, the turn began, is the question fans circle endlessly. The series gives you several candidate moments. There is the moment in the Spirit Oasis in Book 1 when Zuko, in a snowstorm at the North Pole, talks to the unconscious Aang about how the two of them are not so different. There is the moment in the catacombs under Ba Sing Se in Book 2 when Zuko chooses Azula over Iroh, a choice that, by the show's own framing, becomes the bottom from which the rest of his climb proceeds. There is the moment in the lightning storm in Book 3 when Zuko realizes that his father will never love him no matter what he does. There is the moment when Zuko goes to find the Avatar and join him. There is the moment when Zuko stands in front of the Western Air Temple and gives the speech he has practiced on a frog. The honest answer is that the redemption is not a single moment. It is years of small choices, of refusing the easier story, of returning to the harder one. Whether Iroh always knew, from the moment Zuko was banished, that the turn would come, is the deeper question. The show implies that Iroh hoped and waited, and that hope and patience were his actual contribution to his nephew's life. The redemption was Zuko's. The faith that it would happen was Iroh's. The two of them, together, are the show's quiet thesis about how people change. Not alone, not quickly, with the help of someone who refuses to stop hoping in them. Aang's relationship with Katara is one of the show's most warmly contested choices. and the mysteries fans have asked about it are partly aesthetic and partly philosophical. The show, from very early on, signals that Aang loves Katara. Katara's feelings for Aang develop more gradually. By the end of Book 3, the two of them kiss on the balcony of Iroh's tea shop in the upper ring of Ba Sing Se, and the show closes with them as a couple. Some fans have argued for years that the relationship is one-sided in its development, that Katara seems more like a maternal figure to Aang for most of the series, that the show pushes them together by inertia rather than by emotional necessity. Others argue that the show carefully shows you Katara's feelings deepening across the series, in small moments, in unscripted glances, in choices she makes about him. Whether the relationship lasts is the longer question. The wider canon answers this with both yes and a partial complication. Aang and Katara marry, have 3 children, including the airbenders Bumi, Kya, and Tenzin. Aang dies relatively young, at 66, exhausted by the work of restoring the air nomads as a culture. Katara outlives him by decades and is alive, an old woman in the South Pole, in the time of Legend of Korra. What the original series leaves around the relationship is the same thing it leaves around all of its endings. The couple are together at the close. The future is not shown. The future, in the canon, fills in the gaps. The future is partly a love story and partly a long widowhood. The show, at the close, gives you the kiss and lets you imagine the rest. The canon eventually tells you, both are true. Toph's later life is one of the most beloved threads that the wider canon eventually fills in, and one of the few that the original series simply leaves entirely for after the curtain. By the time of Legend of Korra, Toph has done several lifetimes of work. She invented metalbending, she founded a school, she became the first chief of police of Republic City. She had 2 daughters, Lin and Suyin, by 2 different fathers, neither of whom she names to her children for most of their lives. She drifted away from her family. She eventually moved to the Foggy Swamp, where she lived alone in late life, communing with the swamp the way Hu once did. Whether any of that future is visible in the girl you meet in Book 2 is a question with a soft yes and a soft no. The independence is there. The willingness to walk away from her parents is there. The refusal to be sentimental is there. The ability to detect lies, which becomes the foundation of her police work, is there. What is less visible, in the original series, is the loneliness. Toph in Korra is one of the most isolated of the original cast. She loves people. She is hard to live with. The original series gives you the brave child. The wider canon shows you what the brave child becomes after enough decades of being brave alone. Sokka's later life is, perhaps deliberately, the most quietly handled of the wider canon's reveals. By the time of Legend of Korra, Sokka has died. He died before the start of Korra's lifetime, in the years between Aang's death and Korra's birth, by most accounts. The exact circumstances are not detailed. The implication, drawn from references in Korra and from interviews, is that he died of relatively ordinary causes in old age, having served the Southern Water Tribe and the United Republic of Nations as a councilman, having continued to do the strategic work he had begun in his teens. Whether his role as the team's planner ever gets official recognition is something the wider canon largely answers with a yes. He becomes one of the founders of the new political order. He has a long career. He does not, as far as we can tell, ever stop being a person who tells jokes to keep groups of people from falling apart. The wistful version of the question is whether Suki and Sokka stay together. The canon implies they did for a long time, perhaps for most of his life, but the relationship's full shape is not detailed. The show, at the close, gives you the 2 of them as a young couple. The canon gives you a long life. The space between is one of the kindest gaps in the entire franchise. You are invited to picture it. Zuko's later life, by contrast, is one of the most documented in the wider canon. He becomes Fire Lord. He spends decades undoing the damage of his great-grandfather, his grandfather, and his father. He works closely with Aang to broker the founding of Republic City, a city built on land formerly held by the Fire Nation colonies in the Earth Kingdom. He marries, has a daughter named Izumi, and eventually, in old age, abdicates the throne in favor of her. By the time of Legend of Korra, Zuko is an old man, a grandfather, who flies on a dragon and consults on world affairs from the position of an elder. Who he marries is the part the original series leaves open. The canon does not, even today, give you a clear answer. There are theories. Some fans hold to Mai. Some fans note that the show ends with Mai and Zuko together, but that the comics introduce complications. The relationship between Mai and Zuko, in the comics, breaks and is partially repaired. Whether they ended up married, whether Izumi is Mai's daughter, whether there were other partners between, the canon mostly does not say. The mystery is honored. The show implies, but does not confirm. Zuko's private life is given the kind of dignity the show always gave its most contested characters. He gets to be older than the cameras. Azula's later life is the most contested and the most unresolved. The comics, in Smoke and Shadow and elsewhere, follow her into a wandering, unstable, partially redemptive arc, in which she tries, with limited success, to do something other than ruin. By the time of Legend of Korra, Azula is, by most accounts, still alive in canon, though her location and condition are unspecified. There are no further direct appearances. There is no resolution. What the original series leaves open about Azula is the one thread the wider canon refuses to close. She might be alive in a forest somewhere. She might be alive in a temple somewhere, learning to meditate. She might be alive in a prison somewhere, having returned by choice. She might be the powerful, broken aunt to Izumi that nobody talks about at family gatherings. The canon has chosen, very deliberately, to leave her unaccounted for. That is, in its way, a kindness. Azula's story was never the kind of story that ends. What she gets, in the end, is the right to carry her own incompleteness. Ozai's later life is, by contrast, settled. He sits in a prison cell, deprived of his firebending by Aang's energybending, for the rest of his natural life. The comics show him alive in his cell into Aang's adulthood. He is, the show implies, exactly the same man he always was. He just lives in a smaller room now. Whether anything in his cell would change him is the question the show is asking and answering at the same time. The answer the canon gives is no. Some people, the show is willing to say, do not become other people. They simply continue, smaller. Aang's mercy did not turn Ozai into a better man. It simply removed him from the position in which he could be a more dangerous one. That is the honest version of redemption the show is willing to assert. Some people redeem, some people do not. The Avatar's job is to handle both kinds. One of the show's most delicately handled reveals is the family tree that connects Zuko to Avatar Roku. In Book 3, in the episode The Avatar and the Fire Lord, Aang visits Roku in a long flashback and learns the story of Roku and Sozin. Roku, the previous Fire Nation Avatar, had a wife named Ta Min and a daughter. Generations later, Zuko's grandfather on his mother's side, Ursa's father, is the grandson of Roku himself. Zuko, by blood, is the great-great-grandson of Avatar Roku. The show plants the lineage and then quietly walks past what it means for Zuko. Iroh, when he tells Zuko about the connection at the end of that episode, presents it as evidence that Zuko's family carries within it both the legacy of Sozin and the legacy of Roku, both the man who ordered the genocide and the Avatar who would have stopped it. Zuko's choice, Iroh implies, is which side of his blood he is going to honor. The show does not press the metaphor any further. It does not, for instance, suggest that Zuko has any Avatar capacity. It does not suggest that Roku's bloodline gives him a special destiny. It simply gives him a fact and lets the fact sit. Whether the bloodline matters at all in the metaphysics of this world, or whether the show is using it purely as a metaphor about choice, is something the wider canon does not press further. Roku's descendants exist. Zuko is one of them. Izumi, his daughter, is another. The lineage continues quietly through the comics and into Korra, without being made into a plot point. That restraint is one of the show's best instincts. Bloodlines, in this world, are interesting but not destiny. The destiny is what people do. The Boiling Rock is the most isolated prison in the Fire Nation, set inside a volcano in the middle of a boiling lake, and the two-part episode of the same name in Book 3 is the show's heist film, with Sokka and Zuko going in together to break Sokka's father Hakoda and Suki out. What the Boiling Rock represents in the larger geography of the Fire Nation is partly the point. It is a prison built on the assumption that nothing will ever come for the people in it. The Day of Black Sun has just failed. The Water Tribe warriors are scattered. The Earth Kingdom resistance has been crushed in Ba Sing Se. The Fire Nation is, by its own estimation, winning. The Boiling Rock is where they put the people who have annoyed them the most. The fact that two teenagers, one a Fire Nation prince in exile and one a Water Tribe planner, can walk into the prison, manipulate the guards, free the inmates, and escape on a stolen airship is the show's quiet argument that the Fire Nation's confidence is its own weakness. They built the prison on the assumption that nobody would care. The world cared. What the boiling rock leaves you wondering is how many other places like it existed during the war, and how many people were quietly held in them for decades without anyone coming. Hama spent years in a similar prison. Hakoda spent months. The show, by showing you only the boiling rock, is letting you imagine an entire archipelago of Fire Nation prisons where people you will never meet waited. Hakoda, Sokka and Katara's father, is the show's most quietly drawn parent. He left the Southern Water Tribe years before the start of the series to fight the Fire Nation alongside the men of the tribe, leaving his children with their grandmother. Katara has held the absence against him for most of her early life. Sokka has held it less but felt it more. When they reunite, in Book 2 and then in Book 3, the show handles the emotional work with great care. Hakoda is not absolved. He is also not blamed. The reunion is partial. What he did during the years he was away, what battles, what losses, what compromises, the series does not lay out. It gives you the man, scarred, weary, kind, and lets you understand that whatever he did because there was nobody else, and the alternative was watching the Fire Nation come for his children at home. He is the show's quiet portrait of a kind of parent the war made common. The kind who left, did terrible work somewhere else, came back partial. The Day of Black Sun is the moment he gets to fight alongside his son. The boiling rock is the moment his son saves him in return. Whatever the show owes Hakoda as a character, it pays in those two scenes. Bato, who appears with Hakoda's name in the title of one of Book 1's most quietly important episodes, Bato of the Water Tribe, is one of the show's quiet portraits of friendship under siege. He is Hakoda's closest friend. He was wounded during a mission and left behind in a small abbey to recover. When Aang's group arrives in his region, Bato becomes the first adult outside their immediate family that Sokka and Katara have seen in a long time. The episode is about reunion and grief, and the question of whether the children will leave Aang to rejoin their father. What the show plants there is what the war is like for the people who are not its great heroes. Bato is not a famous warrior. He is a friend of one. He spent his war doing dangerous, useful, partly invisible work. The abbey, where he recovers, is itself one of the show's most quietly important institutions, a religious community that takes in the wounded and the displaced regardless of nation. The show does not name the religion or the order. It simply lets you understand that, even during a 100-year war, there are places where the war does not enter, and that people who run those places are doing their own kind of resistance. It just shows you one and trusts you to understand that there are others. Piandao is the swordmaster Sokka studies with in Book 3, and he is one of the most quietly important reveals in the entire series. He is a famous Fire Nation swordsman who has retired to his estate to teach. Sokka, having decided that he needs more than his boomerang to be useful in the coming war, travels to him under a false name. Piandao, who can see immediately that Sokka is not a Fire Nation noble, accepts him anyway. He teaches him swordsmanship. He teaches him calligraphy. He teaches him patience. He gives him, at the end of the training, a sword forged from a meteor that fell on his estate during the training. The reveal is that Piandao is a member of the Order of the White Lotus. He has been waiting, like Bumi and Iroh and the others, for the right moment. He chose to teach Sokka because, as far as the show implies, the Order recognized in Sokka the kind of strategic mind the world was going to need. How widely the Order's network operates, and how many quiet apprenticeships it has been arranging behind the scenes for years, is left for you to imagine. Piandao is one node. The world is presumably full of others. Masters who would receive a young person if a lotus tile arrived in the mail. The Order is a vast informal university of resistance, and the show only ever shows you one classroom of it. Sokka's sword, forged from the meteor that fell near Piandao's estate, becomes one of the show's most beloved props. It is a dark, almost black blade, made from a material that is, in the world's terms, alien. The meteor metal is denser, sharper, and stranger than ordinary steel. Sokka uses it through the rest of the series, loses it during the Day of Black Sun in the chaos of the retreat, and the show treats the loss as a real loss. What other meteors have fallen in this world, and what other strange technologies might be made from them, the show does not press. The sword exists. It is from a falling star. It is the only weapon of its kind in the series. It is one of the few things in the show that hints at a cosmology larger than the four nations and the spirit world. There is, in this world, an outside. Things fall from it occasionally. People make swords out of them. The Serpent of the Serpent's Pass is one of the show's most underused monsters. He guards a narrow strip of land that crosses a lake on the road to Ba Sing Se. He is enormous, ancient, and territorial. The gang encounters him in Book 2, in the episode of the same name, and survives him by working together. Whether he is, in some sense, a spirit, the show does not say. He is treated as a creature, a particularly dangerous animal, but he is large enough and old enough to invite the question. The series has, by this point, established that animals in this world can have spiritual significance, that the lion turtles, the badger moles, the dragons, the sky bison, the moon koi fish are all both animals and something more. The serpent is left ambiguous. He might be just a very large snake. He might be a forgotten spirit who took an animal form and has been guarding that crossing for centuries. The show does not need to decide. The choice is generous. The crossing exists. The serpent guards it. People die there. People survive there. The wider geography of this world includes a great many such past guardians, the show is implying, and we are seeing only one. Aunt Wu is the fortune teller of Makapu village, who Katara and Aang and Sokka visit in Book 1, in an episode named for her. She tells fortunes by reading the bones of fish, the tea leaves, the shapes of clouds. She tells Katara that she will marry a powerful bender. She tells Sokka, repeatedly, that he is going to have a series of unpleasant experiences. She tells Aang's village to relax about the volcano they fear because, in her reading, the volcano will not erupt. The volcano does erupt, and the village is saved only because Aang and Sokka work out that the volcano is going to erupt anyway, and convince the villagers to flee. Whether Aunt Wu's fortune-telling works at all is the show's quietest little riddle. Katara's prediction does come true. She marries Aang, who is the most powerful bender alive. Sokka's predictions of misfortune do come true, comically and repeatedly. The volcano prediction, the only one the show frames as testably wrong, turns out to be wrong. The show is doing something quietly careful. Aunt Wu can see some things. She cannot see others. Her gift is real but incomplete. The show does not call her a fraud. It does not call her a saint. It lets her be a person with a partial gift in a world where partial gifts are the rule. Whether anyone in this world ever sees the future completely is a question the show keeps answering, even with the Avatar, even with the past lives, with no. The future is partly visible. The rest is choice. The play in the Ember Island Players, which the gang watches in the second-to-last episode of Book 3, is one of the show's most extraordinary pieces of self-awareness. The play is a dramatization of the gang's own adventures, written by a Fire Nation playwright with imperfect sources, and the gang sits in the audience watching themselves get portrayed badly. Who exactly is the source for the play is the strange question underneath the comedy. The play depicts events that, in some cases, no Fire Nation observer should have been present for. The play knows about the Cave of Two Lovers. The play knows about the kiss Aang stole from Katara in the cave. The play knows about Toph's adventures in Earth Kingdom prisons. The play knows about the boiling rock. The implication is either that the gang's adventures are already legend in the Fire Nation, that gossip has flowed across borders even during the war, or that the playwright is the kind of figure who, like the mechanist, knows everyone and listens to everything. The Ember Island Players episode is the show's most loving and most cynical piece of meta. The play gets everything wrong, in the way adaptations always get things wrong. The play also gets things devastatingly right. The implication that Aang is dead, that he never came back after the Avatar state was broken, runs through the play, and the gang has to sit through it knowing it might be the most popular version of their story in the Fire Nation. What other versions of the story are circulating elsewhere, the show simply leaves open. The play is one version, the chronicles, presumably, are another. The eventual histories will be others. The truth, as ever, is somewhere in the middle. The mother of Aang's children, by the end of the series, is Katara, and the wider canon spells out their family in detail. Aang and Katara have 3 children. The oldest, Bumi, named after Aang's old friend, is not a bender in his original life. He becomes an airbender only later, during the harmonic convergence event of Legend of Korra's second book, after which a wave of new airbenders appears around the world. The middle child, Kaya, named after Katara's mother, is a waterbender. The youngest, Tenzin, is an airbender from birth, and becomes the central inheritor of the air nomad culture, the man who, by the time of Legend of Korra, is the only known airbender alive other than Aang for most of his life. Whether the air nomads can be restored as a culture by a single family is the larger question the wider canon both plants and partly closes. The honest answer is partly. Tenzin and his children, the airbender Jinora and her siblings, become the seed of the rebuilt Air Nation. Then harmonic convergence does the rest. The original Avatar series ends before any of this is on the horizon. Within the original series, whether Aang ever will rebuild the air nomads is left as an open promise. Katara does say, at the end, that they will. The wider canon takes that promise and complicates it. The rebuilding takes a generation. The full restoration takes longer. The air nomad culture, by the time of Korra's adulthood, is mostly Tenzin's responsibility, and the air acolytes' devotion, and the new airbenders' surprise. How a culture can be remade after a genocide is a question the show, with its usual quiet honesty, answers by saying it can be partly remade, with great effort, by people who care enough to give their lives to it. That is the most it is willing to promise. The avatar after Aang is Korra, born into the Southern Water Tribe in the same year Aang died, raised in a White Lotus compound, and recognized as the avatar as a toddler when she begins bending 3 elements within minutes of each other. What kind of avatar Aang's successor would be is the question the original series cannot quite address, because Korra had not yet been made. The choice the showrunners eventually made, when they did create Korra, was to make her, in many ways, his opposite. Korra is aggressive where Aang was peaceful. Korra is grounded in the body where Aang was grounded in the spirit. Korra is the kind of avatar who solves problems by punching them, where Aang spent most of his series running away from the fight. Whether the avatar cycle is corrective, whether each new avatar is, in some sense, a response to what the previous one was, is something the 2 series, taken together, invite you to wonder. The show does not commit to that thesis directly. There is no in-canon mechanism by which Rava chooses the next avatar based on what the world now needs. But the pattern, across the avatars we are shown, is suggestive. Roku, methodical and slow. Aang, peaceful and improvisational. Korra, direct and forceful. Each one corrects, in some way, the limits of the last. Whether that is the spirit's intention or a coincidence the writers liked, the show gives you the suggestion and lets you decide. Vatu, the spirit of darkness, is the answer Korra eventually gives to a question Avatar, the Last Airbender, never quite asked. The original series presented the Avatar as the bridge between humans and spirits, balancing the 2 worlds. It did not, in the original series, present the Avatar as an active partner against an active opposing force. Vatu, introduced in Korra's 2nd book in the beginnings episodes, is that opposing force. He is the spirit of chaos, locked in eternal conflict with Rava, the spirit of light. Wan, the first avatar, fused with Rava during the harmonic convergence, and the avatar cycle since then has been the embodied form of that partnership. Once you know about Vatu, the original series can be read backwards in a way that suggests some of the imbalance Aang has to address was Vatu's doing in some indirect way. The show, written before Vatu existed, does not make this argument. But the comets that empower firebenders, the celestial events that destabilize the spirit world, the cycles of darkness the past avatars hint at, all begin to look, in retrospect, like parts of a larger pattern that Vatu is somewhere behind. The honest reading is that the wider canon is doing its own thing and not retrofitting the original series. The looser reading is that the original series was always implying a larger cosmology than it had room to show, and that Korra simply filled in the names. Yakone, the bloodbending crime lord who appears in flashback in Korra's 1st book, is the most direct narrative descendant of Hama. He is the kind of bloodbender Hama was teaching the world how to make. He bloodbends without a full moon, in daylight, with his eyes open. He uses the technique to control the criminal underworld of Republic City for years. How widely the technique has spread between Hama's prison and Yakone's adulthood is something the wider canon does not give you a clean chain for. The implication is that Hama taught Katara, that Katara refused to teach it forward, but that other waterbenders, somewhere in the world, learned the technique on their own, perhaps by observation, perhaps by reinvention. Yakone, by the time of his criminal career, has descendants of his own, his sons Tarlok and Noatak, the latter of whom becomes the masked revolutionary Amun. Amun takes bloodbending further than even his father. He uses it to remove the bending of other benders, a technique that, in the universe of the show, is only otherwise known to have been done by Aang in his single energy bending. Whether what Aemon does is a kind of bloodbending or a kind of energy bending or some intersection of the two, the wider canon refuses to finally close. Korra herself wonders. The show does not answer. Bloodbending, in the long arc of the franchise, becomes the most consequential bending technique the show ever introduced. It started with one woman in a cell in a Fire Nation prison. It ended, by Korra's adulthood, capable of bringing down a city. The Air Acolytes are the small community of non-bender followers of Air Nomad teachings who emerge in the comics and become more prominent in Legend of Korra. They wear robes modeled on the Air Nomads. They study the texts. They live, by Korra's time, at Air Temple Island near Republic City, alongside Tenzin and his family. What they answer, in their existence, is the deeper question of what survives of a culture after the people who carried it are gone. The original series gives you no Air Acolytes. The genocide is complete. The comics introduce them as a project Aang has been working on for years, gathering people from all 4 nations who want to learn the Air Nomad way. Whether the Acolytes can be true inheritors of a culture they did not grow up inside, or whether they are something else, a deeply respectful continuation by other means, is the question the comics leave with you. The wider canon takes the position that they are doing the best they can, that the culture exists in them in a partial and meaningful way, and that the new airbenders who emerge during harmonic convergence, joining the Acolytes, eventually grow back into something close to a full Air Nation. The honest answer the franchise gives is that genocide cannot be undone, but that culture is sometimes more portable than its first carriers imagined. The Acolytes are the show's quiet argument for that. The connection between the original animated series and the Netflix live-action remake is, for many fans, its own quiet anxiety. And the connection between the animated series and the unrelated film adaptation from years earlier is its own quiet wound. The film, released in 2010, was widely received as a major artistic failure within the fandom, and the original creators have publicly distanced themselves from it. The Netflix series, launched more recently, is a separate project, made with different creative leadership after the original creators left, and its reception has been mixed. Within the wider Avatar canon, neither adaptation is treated as canonical. They are alternate versions of events the animated series has already told. Whether any animated story can be successfully translated into live action at the scale required is the question the original series quietly carries against its imitators. The franchise's most coherent answer, by most accounts, is the upcoming Avatar Studios film about Aang as an adult, set during the years between the original series and Korra, which is being made by people more directly connected to the original creators. That film is being framed as the bridge between the two series, and as the place where many of the longest-standing questions about Aang's adulthood will be addressed. As of this point in the franchise's history, that film and its companion projects are the most direct path to resolving questions the show has been carrying. The wait until those projects are released is partly a wait of corporate priorities. The franchise is patient, the fans are patient, the story is still being told. The original series was created by Michael DiMartino and Brian Konietzko, and ran on Nickelodeon from February of 2005 to July of 2008. It was animated in part by South Korean studio JM Animation. Its writing staff included Aaron Ehas, Tim Hedrick, John O'Brien, and several others, with the creators and Ehas often credited as among the most important architects of its storytelling structure. The show ran for 3 books and 61 episodes. By most accounts, the showrunners ended the story at 3 books because the natural shape of it closed at the end of the Fire book. What a 4th book would have looked like is the question the production history quietly carries. There are no clean answers. The most reliable interpretation is that any continuation would have explored the aftermath of the war, the rebuilding of the Earth Kingdom, the establishment of what eventually became Republic City. Some of that material later showed up in the comics. Some of it later showed up, in transformed form, in Legend of Korra. None of it ever appeared as a book 4. The choice the creators made was honored by the choice they made. The story ended where it ended. Anything else was for somewhere else. The sky bison are the show's most quietly tragic species. Appa, the bison Aang travels with for the entire series, is the last one we see for most of the show. The implication, drawn from the Southern Air Temple episode and from offhand remarks across the series, is that the Fire Nation in the Genocide killed most of the bison along with the Air Nomads, that the sky bison were a sacred animal of the Air Nomads, that the Air Nomads and the bison had a relationship in which each chose the other, when an air nomad came of age. Aang chose Appa. Appa chose Aang. The two of them were frozen together in the iceberg for 100 years and woke together. Whether other bison survived is the question the show plants and partially closes. In Book 2, in the episodes that follow Appa's kidnapping, the gang is told by a series of strangers that Appa has been seen, taken, sold, and held in various places, and the show implies that other bison exist but mostly in captivity or hiding. The wider canon, by the time of Korra, makes clear that the sky bison have recovered as a species, in part through the air acolytes' careful stewardship of Appa's descendants. What Appa carried, emotionally, in those years, is what the show is quietly honest about. Appa is loyal. Appa is brave. Appa is, when he is separated from Aang, lonely in a way the show takes time to depict directly. Appa's kidnapping arc, across the second half of Book 2, is one of the most emotionally precise pieces of animal storytelling in any animated series of its era. What it cost Appa to come back, the series implies, was real. Appa, by the end of the show, is still loyal, still loving, but a little more careful, the way any creature is after the worst thing has nearly happened to him. Momo, the flying lemur, is the show's other quietly endangered species. The lemurs were native to the air temples and, like the bison, suffered enormously in the genocide. Momo is the only one Aang's group sees for almost the entire series. Like Appa, he is the last of a species that the show's wider canon will eventually restore, but in the original series, Momo is alone. Whether Momo understands his own situation is the question the show plants. The show is careful to keep Momo as a creature, not an anthropomorphic person. He chitters, he steals food, he is curious, he is loyal. He is afraid of certain things and brave about others. He is not, the show insists, a person. He is an animal, but he is also, in some quiet way, a witness to the loss of his species, and the show, in small moments, lets you understand that he carries it. There are episodes in which Momo, alone in the temple ruins, walks through old corridors as if remembering. There are episodes in which Momo, presented with another lemur or with a place where lemurs once were, behaves in a way that suggests recognition. The show does not press the question of how much Momo knows. It simply lets you imagine. Like Appa, Momo is, in the end, both a beloved pet and a survivor of a Holocaust. The show treats both truths with equal weight. Master Pakku is the water-bending master Aang and Katara train with at the Northern Water Tribe in Book 1, and his story carries one of the show's most quietly satisfying personal reconciliations. Pakku, when we first meet him, refuses to teach Katara because the Northern Water Tribe's tradition holds that female waterbenders are healers, not warriors. Katara challenges him. They duel. Pakku, watching her bend, realizes that her style is unfamiliar in a way that suggests a specific lineage, and he asks where she learned. She tells him she learned from her grandmother. He asks her grandmother's name. Kana. Pakku, the show then reveals, was engaged to Kana decades earlier. She fled the Northern Water Tribe because she refused to live inside the tradition that he had upheld. She made her way to the south, married, raised children, became Katara's grandmother. Pakku, in the moment of the reveal, agrees to teach Katara and, eventually, to travel south to find Kana again. The two of them, in the comics and in later references, reconcile and marry. How many other such reconciliations happened across the four nations once the war ended, the show only lets you guess at. The implication is many. People who had been separated by tradition, by war, by exile, looking for each other. Pakku and Kana are one of the show's quiet promises that some kinds of grief can, with enough years, be undone. The Northern Water Tribe's traditions about female waterbenders are one of the show's most pointedly criticized institutions. The series, through Katara's challenge to Pakku and through Pakku's eventual reform, takes the position that the tradition is wrong, that the separation of healing and combat by gender is a regional habit that has hardened into law. The Southern Water Tribe, the show tells you, never had the same restriction. Katara's grandmother left precisely because she refused to live inside it. How deep the conservatism runs, and how much of it persists after Pakku's reform, is something the wider canon shows you in slow degrees. By Korra's time, the Northern Water Tribe has begun to integrate female combatants, but still operates under more conservative norms than the South, or the rebuilt Earth Kingdom, or the United Republic. Some traditions take generations to change. The show, by giving you Pakku and Katara's confrontation as early as Book 1, is signaling that the war is not the only thing the world needs to recover from. The cultures themselves carry old wounds that the new generation has to address. That, in retrospect, is one of the show's most quietly mature thematic choices. The Fire Nation is not the only nation that needs to look at itself. Princess Yue is one of the show's quietest threads, and one of its most moving. We learn, when we meet her, that as an infant she was sickly and likely to die, and that her father took her to the spirit oasis and placed her on the grass beside the koi pond, and that the moon spirit, Tui, in her fish form, lent the infant some of her own life so that the child could live. Yue grew up white-haired because of the moon's gift. When Tui is killed at the end of Book 1, Yue is the only person in the world who can return that gift. She does. She becomes the moon spirit. What kind of consciousness Yue is now is the question the show leaves you with. She appears later, in spirit form, to help Aang. She is more than the moon. She is also, still, in some sense, Yue. The fan theories about her ongoing role in the world have run for years. Some have proposed that she is, by Korra's time, one of the great quiet powers of the spirit world, guiding waterbenders, watching over the water tribes. The wider canon does not commit to a specific role for her. She is simply, the show says, the moon. She loves Sokka still, perhaps. She watches the tides. She is the brightest piece of evidence the show ever gives you that giving something back to the world does not necessarily mean disappearing from it. Sokka and Yue's story is, in the long arc, one of the show's quietest griefs. He met her at the start of his stay in the Northern Water Tribe. He fell in love with her in days. He had to watch her give up her body to save the world. He carried it. The show is honest about it. Yue's death is referred to with care across the rest of the series. Sokka, when he speaks of her, does not pretend the relationship was complete. He acknowledges that it was brief, and that it was real, and that her decision was the right one, even though it broke him. How this kind of loss shapes a person across a lifetime is the larger version of the same question. The wider canon implies that Sokka eventually loves again, particularly Suki. The show does not suggest that Yue's loss is overcome. It suggests that it becomes one of the things he carries. The character continues, the grief continues. Both can be true. Sokka, in the original series, is, by Book 3, one of the most quietly mature teenagers on screen, in part because he learned, before 16, what it is to love someone who chooses something larger than the two of them. The boy in the iceberg, the very first image of the show, is one of its quietest unanswered things. Aang, frozen for 100 years, was put into the iceberg by his own avatar state, when, fleeing the storm that capsized his bison on the run from a life he could not face, he entered the avatar state involuntarily, surrounded himself with ice and air to protect himself and Appa, and was carried to the bottom of the ocean to sleep. The show explains this in flashbacks, particularly in the storm in Book 1. What happened to Aang's consciousness during the 100 years inside the ice is something the show implies the avatar state kept him alive through. The wider canon, in Korra's spirit episodes, implies that something like a kind of dreaming time passed for him, that he was, in some sense, in the spirit world for 100 years, even if he himself does not remember it that way. How much of his maturity the 100 years gave him is a question with no clean answer. Aang on the page is a 12-year-old who has, by some calendars, been alive for 112 years. He behaves like a 12-year-old most of the time. He behaves occasionally like someone older. The show is careful not to overcommit to either reading. He is a child. He is also the avatar. The 100 years did something to him. We are not entirely sure what. The Storm, the episode that contains Aang's iceberg flashback, is also one of the show's most quietly important pieces of character architecture for him. Aang ran from his temple because the elders had decided to take him from Monk Gyatso, the closest thing he had to a father, and move him to the Eastern Air Temple to complete his avatar training. He was 12. He did not want to be the avatar. He did not want to lose his guardian. He took Appa and left in the middle of the night. The storm caught him. The avatar state took him. He was frozen. Whether the genocide could have been prevented if Aang had stayed is the question that hangs over the rest of his series. The honest answer is probably not. The comet was coming. Sozin had been planning for decades. Aang as a 12-year-old could not have stopped the Fire Nation's military by himself. The show, however, lets Aang carry the guilt anyway. Aang spends much of Book 1 and Book 2 believing, at some level, that the genocide is partly his fault because he ran. The show is gentle, but honest about it. Aang's guilt is wrong in the literal sense. The genocide is not his fault. The guilt is also true to how grief works. He survived. The other airbenders did not. Survivor's guilt does not check whether it is logically justified. It simply arrives. The show lets Aang carry it and lets him, slowly, set it down. The chakras, beyond Aang's specific journey with Guru Pathik, are one of the show's most precisely borrowed pieces of real-world spirituality. The 7 chakras Pathik describes are drawn closely from the Hindu and Buddhist traditions, with some modifications. The names, the locations, the associated emotional blockages are all consistent with traditional descriptions. The show, throughout, treats spiritual practice with a kind of borrowed gravity, drawing on Hindu, Buddhist, and Taoist traditions in particular, on Chinese calligraphy, on Inuit and other indigenous traditions for the water tribes, on Tibetan monasticism for the air nomads. How much of its spirituality is real practice rendered for animation is something the show is not trying to hide, but does not announce. Pathik's teachings, taken seriously, are a fair entry point into chakra meditation in the real world. Iroh's wisdom is, in many passages, a careful adaptation of Taoist and Buddhist sayings. The avatar state itself is, structurally, a kind of mystical enlightenment with martial consequences. The show, by drawing on real traditions, gives its spirituality a depth that pure invention would not have managed. By most accounts, the writers tried to honor the source traditions while inventing freely, and the people they consulted, including martial artists and meditation teachers, helped them keep the borrowings respectful. The show is one of the few mass-market animated series of its era that takes meditation seriously, and lets characters spend whole scenes simply sitting. That seriousness is part of what makes the spiritual mysteries land. Aang's eventual death, in the canon, is one of the show's most quietly sad facts. Aang dies at 66, having spent his adult life rebuilding the Air Nation as best he could, and helping Zuko establish the United Republic of Nations on land taken from the Earth Kingdom's old colonies. The wider canon implies that the rebuilding work, combined with the long-term physical toll of having spent 100 years in the iceberg, contributed to his shorter-than-expected lifespan. Whether Aang knew he was going to die young, and whether his commitment to Tenzin's airbending education was, in part, a race against time, is what the wider canon quietly invites you to wonder. Tenzin, in Korra, is the inheritor of the Air Nation. Aang's death, in the wider canon, is the moment Tenzin becomes the sole adult airbender in the world for decades. The original series gives you none of this. The original series ends with Aang in his teens, restored, beloved, holding Katara, having saved the world. What came after, the wider canon answers in stages. Aang grew up. He had work to do. He did much of it. He did not get to finish. He died younger than he should have. Tenzin took over. That is the version of the canon you can carry if you want it. The original series is honest enough that, if you do not want it, you can stop at the end of the 3rd book, and the future is as open as you like. There is a theory, popular among some fans, that the original ending of the series was meant to include Sokka's death. The theory comes from interviews in which the writers acknowledged considering, at various points, killing a major character in the final battle, and from the way Sokka's storyline at the end of Book 3 has him separated from the others, in dangerous skirmishes, on board an airship that crashes. The fan reading is that the writers wrote towards Sokka's death, then pulled back at the last minute. By most accounts, the creators have, at various points, said they discussed possibilities, but did not commit to any specific character's death. The most reliable interpretation is that the series considered the possibility, found it would not serve the story they wanted to tell, and chose to let the central group survive. What kind of show it would have been if a major character had died is a question that has its own life inside the fandom. Some fans argue it would have been more honest about the cost of war. Others argue it would have been more grim than the show's tone could carry. The show, by choosing survival, took the position that the cost of the war was already paid in advance by the people who had died before the series began. The genocide. The siege of Ba Sing Se, Lu Ten, Ursa, in her exile, Yue, Jet. The cost was paid. The teenagers got to live. That is the position the show is willing to defend. Why the Avatar state can be so unstable is one of the show's most carefully sketched ideas, and it ties back to Wan's origin story. Wan, when he fused with Rava, became the first Avatar by an act of will and an act of timing, during the harmonic convergence. The fusion, the wider canon implies, is renewed at each harmonic convergence, and Wan's lineage, the chain of avatars, is what carries Rava through history. The thing the show is doing with this idea is making the human side of the fusion variable. Each avatar is a different person with a different temperament and a different relationship to Rava's presence. The avatar state, when it manifests, is not just the human accessing the spirit. It is the human accommodating the spirit, and the accommodation is harder for some avatars than others. Aang, the show suggests, has particular difficulty because his air nomad upbringing was about non-attachment, and the avatar state requires a kind of grounded attachment to the world to be steered safely. Korra in the sequel has different difficulties because her aggressive nature does not let her listen to Rava as carefully as the work requires. Each avatar is, the wider canon says, both a body for Rava and a personality that interrupts her. Why Aang has such difficulty is something the original series plants without explaining. The wider canon answers later. The original series simply lets you watch him struggle with the most powerful tool in the world and try to be a person at the same time. The question of whether there were avatars before the first Avatar is one of the franchise's most direct and most quietly resolved. The answer, given in beginnings, is no. Wan is the first. Before him, there were humans, and there were spirits, and there were lion turtles giving and taking bending, but there was no avatar. The cycle began with Wan, that is, in a way, one of the most surprising things the franchise closes. Most cosmologies in fantasy fiction imply an unending chain of chosen heroes stretching back to the beginning of time. Avatar gives you a specific origin, a specific person, a specific decision. Wan chose to fuse with Rava. The fusion stuck. Everything else followed. Whether anyone in the show is aware that the Avatar cycle has a beginning is something the original series cannot quite address, because Wan had not yet been written. The honest answer is probably some are. Iroh, possibly. Pathik, possibly. The lion turtle, certainly. Most others, no. The Avatar institution is, by the time of the original series, roughly 10,000 years old by the show's own later count, and the origin of it has receded into a kind of unconscious cultural certainty. Whether knowing the origin would change how people relate to the institution is the open thread. Korra eventually has to reckon with this directly. Aang never quite does. The show leaves the question open. The wider canon picks it up. Both choices are coherent. Why some firebenders can generate lightning and others cannot is one of the show's most underexplained mechanical questions. Iroh tells Zuko that lightning generation requires an inner peace, a separation of positive and negative energy. Zuko, when he tries, cannot do it. Azula, who in the show is presented as anything but at peace, can. The show is honest about the contradiction. Iroh, when confronted with it, explains that Azula's lightning is born from a different kind of internal separation, that she has so completely suppressed certain emotions, particularly any kind of vulnerability, that the separation she achieves is its own dark mirror of the calm Iroh describes. Whether lightning is, in some sense, a measure of emotional architecture is the deeper version of the question. The honest reading is partly. People who can generate lightning are people whose internal world is sharply structured, whether through equanimity or through suppression. People who cannot are people whose internal world is mixed, fluid, less separated. Zuko, throughout the show, is the prime example of the second kind. His firebending, when he is at his most powerful, is fueled by anger that runs through him without being separated. He can heat, he can flare. He cannot yet produce lightning. By the time of his final duel with Azula, his calm has matured enough that he can redirect her lightning. He still does not generate his own. Whether he ever does, the wider canon does not give a clear answer. The implication is that, by adulthood, Zuko learns. The Korra era depicts Zuko using lightning. The original series leaves him still learning. Azula's breakdown in the finale, the slow collapse of her hairpinning and her composure, and finally her firebending, is the show's most carefully built portrait of a particular kind of psychological injury. What exactly broke her is something the show partly answers. The candidate causes are many. Mai and Ty Lee's defection at the Boiling Rock. Ozai's decision to take her brother's role at the burning of the Earth Kingdom and leave her to be Fire Lord of the Home Islands. The slow accumulation of distrust. The hallucinations of her mother that Azula sees in the mirror in the final episodes, where Ursa, or Azula's projection of her, tells her that she loves her. that she always loved her, and that what Azula is doing is wrong. The show is careful about the hallucinations. They are not necessarily Ursa's spirit. They are, more probably, Azula's own buried mind speaking to itself in the only voice she allows it to take. Whether anything in the world could have prevented the collapse is a question the show leaves you with the sense of answering no. Azula's foundations were always too narrow to support what Ozai had built on them. The collapse was structural. The triggers, in the finale, were the particular shoves that brought it down. The breakdown is one of the most carefully animated sequences in the series. Azula's face, in the moments after Zuko traps her on the palace floor and Katara binds her, is the face of a child who has just realized that the love she has been performing for has never been on offer. Whether anyone in that family ever loved anyone the way they were supposed to is the harder question. The show, with restraint, suggests that some of them did, that Iroh loved Lu Ten that way, that Ursa loved Zuko that way, that Zuko loves Iroh that way. Whether Azula will, in any of her future lives, learn what that kind of love feels like, the canon refuses to say. The role of the Avatar in the cycle of war is the show's largest and quietest theme. The Avatar exists, the show says, to keep the balance between the four nations and between the human world and the spirit world. The series begins by asking you to consider what happens when the Avatar is absent. The answer is a 100-year war. The series ends by asking you to consider what kind of Avatar the world needs after a 100-year war is over. The answer is an Avatar who chooses mercy, where his predecessors might have chosen execution, who restores rather than punishes, who teaches rather than rules. The harder question the show keeps almost in the corner of its eye is whether the Avatar institution itself is the right shape for the world. Korra eventually addresses this directly. Aang, in the original series, mostly accepts the institution as given and tries to live up to it as well as he can. What the show closes its run on is not whether Aang has done his job. He clearly has. The open question is whether the institution he serves can carry the weight of the world after he is gone. The wider canon will answer this slowly. Korra struggles. The institution is partly reshaped. Tenzin's children carry their own parts. The show, at its close, gives you Aang at the end of his first great work, with the future ahead of him. The future, as ever, is open. The work is large. What stays with you in the end is not which questions the show left unanswered. What stays with you is what kind of attention the show was teaching you to pay. The show taught you to look at small things, to notice the moment the firebender hesitates, to notice the moment the earthbender refuses, to notice the moment the airbender, in spite of everything, chooses kindness. The show taught you that mysteries are not necessarily problems. Sometimes they are invitations to keep watching. So that is the long walk. Almost every named mystery the show set up, the major theories the fans have built, the canon and the wider canon, in the order they roughly arrive in the story. Some of them have been answered in the years since. Most of them have not, and probably will not, because the show was always going to be the kind of story that left some things in the dark on purpose. That is part of why it has lasted. A show that closes every door is a show you remember once and put away. A show that leaves doors open is a show you find yourself standing in front of years later, wondering what is behind one you never quite went through. Avatar is full of those doors. Wan Shi Tong's library is one. Ko's tree is one. The Lion Turtle's island is one. Iroh's spirit world is one. Ursa's new face is one. Aang's 100 years in the ice is one. The thing the show is teaching you, in keeping them shut, is that some doors are not for the heroes to open. Some doors are for time to open. Some doors are for the next Avatar. Some doors are for the heir acolyte who, generations from now, finds the right scroll in a temple library and reads it by lantern light. Some doors are for you. Avatar, The Last Airbender, more than almost any animated series of the past 2 decades, has held its place because the world it built feels lived in. The mysteries are part of that. A show with a perfectly answered world feels closed. A show with a half-answered world feels real. You believe that there are stories outside the ones you have seen. You believe that the war that ended at the close of Book 3 was the war of these particular characters, but that other characters, in other corners of the world, had their own wars, their own quiet redemptions, their own small mercies, their own losses, their own people who came home, and their own people who did not. The show is, in its quiet way, an argument for a kind of attention, not for completism, not for getting all the answers, for sitting inside a story that is bigger than the camera and trusting that the parts you cannot see are still there. That is the philosophy the air nomads might have taught if they had survived to teach it. That is the philosophy Aang, alone among them, gets to carry forward. That is the philosophy Iroh teaches Zuko in his tea shop on a quiet afternoon by paying close attention to a single small thing while a war continues somewhere far away. The form attention takes when there is more world than you can hold is, in the end, what the show keeps inviting you to practice. The show keeps inviting you to hold what you can and to leave the rest with respect for someone else, or for later, or for yourself, when you have changed enough to see it. Thank you for spending this much of your night with Avatar. We have walked through the mysteries that the show planted and the theories that the fans have built around them. We have visited the Lion Turtle and Wan Shi Tong's library and the spirit world and the 100 years inside the ice. We have sat with Iroh in his shop and with Aang in the snow and with Azula on the palace floor. We have left almost every door we found exactly as we found it, half open, the lamp still lit inside. If sleep has not arrived yet, that is fine. The show is patient. So is the night. So is the Avatar. Settle in, breathe out, let the quiet do its work. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.